We're going to start preaching in a minute. Come on up, Rick. We want everyone to go ahead and take your seats. We're going to get started. We're missing a lot of committee members. Anybody know where they are? Bar still open? I think most of you were here last night for dinner. If you weren't, welcome to Brasstown Valley Resort. Hope you enjoyed your stay last night or your trip up this morning. Some of you drove up. We are going to have a long day. The agenda is very lengthy, and we want to ask our committee members who have questions to hold the questions until the presenter is finished. That way we can move to the next presenter as soon as those questions are answered. We will break for lunch, maybe a few minutes before 12, at which time you would be a good time to go grab your bags out of your room if you haven't already done so. If you need to use the restroom, just come and go as you please. We're going to just keep plowing through this agenda. Otherwise, we would lose control of the meeting. So, where's Seth? We have everybody, all the presenters are ready. We'll start with Rick. Do you want to say a few words?
Just one. Russell has a couple of things he wants to add before we get started. So there's been some changes in the EV. So, Russell, you want to just come up and do it, or we'll just hand you the microphone? But we appreciate, especially last night, everybody being together and fellowship and getting to know each other a little bit better and seeing the differences in some opinions and or what we should be doing. It really magnified it. But we sure appreciate everybody being together.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things since we were together last time in the EV community or the national perspective on EV. Some of you probably saw the headlines. California had made a big statement by 2035 to be carbon-free in auto sales, which would point to EVs or other alternate fuel sources. Of course, that's California, so I'll reserve any further comment on that. But importantly, nationally, Federal Highway Administration put out a notice of proposed rulemaking regarding the waiver of Buy America requirements for electric vehicle chargers. So for everybody that's in the industry or perspective to be in the industry, please take opportunity to review this. Part of the Build America, Buy America increased the Buy America requirements nationally as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, so which is a very good notion, but very hard to deploy quickly. This notice of proposed rulemaking that has been put forth puts some timelines to basically stagger implementation of the Buy America requirements for EV charging supply units, which will be interesting. There had already been public comment on this and about the integration of chargers. So if you're in the EV supply unit business, I'd love to hear from you at a break or something about your notion of Buy America compliance. But please take time to Google that, provide comments. Basically, from the department's perspective, these timelines need to be shifted further out so that implementation could happen on a quicker term than the longer term as people and companies ramp up to be compliant with the Buy America policy. But, Mr. Chairman, that was the two items, was California and national notice of proposed rulemaking by Federal Highway about implementation of Buy America requirements for EV supply units. Thank you.
You didn't say anything about them flattening the curve of their energy use.
You can't turn the AC on.
While you're charging your car. But first off, we have Michael Dwyer with U.S. Energy Information Administration.
All right. Let me know if you all can hear me or can't hear me at any point during this. I'm going to try to turn my video on, but my computer fan is now going wild. Okay, here we are. Cool. Like he said, my name is Michael Dwyer, and I'm on the Transportation Demand Team at the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA. Apologies for not being able to attend in person, but I greatly appreciate the opportunity to present some of our modeling results from the AEO, as well as some of the assumptions behind those results. So a real quick outline here. I won't spend a lot of time going over what I'm already going to go over, but I would like to give a quick intro to the AEO and NEMS, which is the model underlying the AEO. Then I'll walk through some of the modeling methodology for light duty vehicles and NEMS. I'm going to limit the amount of modelees that I talk about, but I think it's really helpful for context for you folks to see how we're thinking about EV adoption and just light duty vehicles in general in the United States. Then I'll run through a few light duty vehicle results from the AEO, and then spend a little more time on what assumptions go into those results, or what assumptions produce those results, as well as some of the key drivers of EV adoption. Then, of course, the thing on everyone's mind is uncertainties in those assumptions. So the AEO, or the Annual Energy Outlook, is developed using the National Energy Modeling System, or NEMS, and it's centered on a reference case. So, and this reference case is not a prediction of what will happen. This isn't what we as EIA think is going to be the future, but it's rather a modeled projection of what might happen given certain assumptions and methodologies. So for instance, the reference case incorporates only existing law and policies. It's often used as a case to which EIA or even other academia or consultancies can compare relative impacts of alternative policies. So an example of that, CAFE fuel economy standards, which are compulsory and enforceable, are assumed to be met in the future. But when they sunset, so the current standards sunset in 2026, it's not replaced by a stricter or a looser standard. It just flatlines. Vehicles can continue to get more efficient, of course, if it's cost effective, but they are not required to get more efficient. Additionally, the reference case typically projects technological evolutions rather than revolutions. So we don't try to identify disruptive technologies or try to time when they're going to hit the market and how they'll be adopted. So the big example there is batteries. We don't assume that solid state or molten sulfur or any of these other advanced techs are going to happen in the projection. We just have the same technology, standard lithium ion chemistries like LFP or NMC, becoming more affordable as production continues to ramp up with sales. And one additional note at the bottom there is that AEO 2022 modeling was completed in November of 2021. So anything that happened after November 2021 is not included in the projection, including policies. So this is kind of a rudimentary spider web looking chart, but it's a quick summary of what NEMS actually is. And it's a general equilibrium model that projects US energy demand by fuel, by mode, and by region. So you see all the supply modules on the left, and then all the demand modules on the right, and conversion in the middle. So transportation is just one piece of the broader NEMS framework. Now I'm specifically, obviously, talking about transportation here, but we're really going to dive into light duty vehicles only, with a specific focus on electrification. But note that NEMS also has detailed models of freight movements, so truck, rail, marine, as well as air travel. Again, I won't be touching on any of that. So at a very basic level, the AEO is intended to show how energy could change in the future in the United States. And to estimate that, we need to estimate how much energy will be consumed. And a piece of that is the light duty vehicle energy consumption. And I have a very basic flow chart here on how we do that in the model. So first, we estimate the makeup of the on-road fleet. How old are all the vehicles? How many vehicles are there? What kind of, do they have gasoline engines? Are they EVs? Then we calculate a fuel economy for those vehicles. We estimate how much travel people will demand in the future. and then you just divide the miles by the fuel economy and you get energy. So at a very basic level, that's what NEMS is doing for light duty vehicles. When we talk about EVs, I think the biggest area of uncertainty here is that estimated makeup of the on-road fleet. So how many EVs are actually going to be on the road? And so we're primarily going to focus there today. So this is the way that NEMS represents that on-road fleet. You see each of the boxes here, on-road stock. Year over year, we have an estimate of what that stock looks like. That stock in each of those boxes includes all the light duty vehicles in the United States. So between 250 and 260 million vehicles. We track them by how old they are, what powertrain they have, so gas, diesel, EV, plug-in hybrid, what size class they are, a midsize sedan, a pickup truck, etc., and where they're registered. And each year, the composition of that fleet is going to change as new vehicles enter. I have it through the top here in sales, and as other vehicles are retired. Out the bottom here is scrap. That latter piece, the scrappage or scrap, basically sets a maximum rate at which that entire fleet can turn over. Based on our analysis of state vehicle registration data, the average vehicle is in service for between 15 and 20 years, depending on where it's driven and really what type of vehicle it is. For instance, pickup trucks are typically on the road longer than a subcompact sedan. So this is really the halfway point. 50% of vehicles last between 15 and 20 years. The remaining 50% are on the road even longer than that. And many vehicles, between 10 or 15%, are still on the road even after 25 years. Improved durability and, at least in current times, higher vehicle MSRPs could result in even longer vehicle lifetimes as people hold on to their vehicles for longer. So this suggests that, at least in the current world, with these assumptions based on historical data, that if EVs were to reach 100% of sales today, where no gasoline vehicles are sold from now on, it would be over 25 years before the national fleet approaches fully electric. Again, half of the fleet, probably between around 15 years. But for the entire fleet to turn over would likely take over 25 years. Most of the focus right now, though, is on vehicle sales, and rightly so, because that's where the EVs will enter the fleet. And specifically how those sales are distributed across the different powertrains, EVs and plug-in hybrids, but also regular hybrids, diesels, gasoline, etc. So the final makeup of the new vehicles entering the market, it heavily relies on both what powertrains manufacturers are offering and what powertrains consumers are choosing to purchase. And NEMS represents both of those actors in the model. And I'm going to talk about different parties here, the manufacturer and the consumer, as if we model them individually, but the model doesn't have individual consumers picking between a Toyota and a Honda. It's done at a more aggregate level. Just keep that in mind. So like I said, NEMS models manufacturers and consumers separately. Manufacturers build the vehicles, a representative vehicle for each powertrain type, and consumers then select which of these to purchase based on various attributes that the vehicle has, like its price or its fuel economy. So specifically focusing on the manufacturer piece here. NEMS breaks the passenger vehicle market into two types. You can see in the round table on the left, passenger cars and light duty trucks. Both of these are still light duty passenger vehicles. It's light duty trucks are like your F-150 all the way down to even an all-wheel drive Honda CR-V. Each of those types is further broken out into 8 size classes as shown. And each of those size classes can then include all 16 powertrains as options for the consumer. So within each size class, on the left, manufacturers build a vehicle with each of the powertrain options as shown on the right, and that vehicle that they build is defined by these attributes: its fuel economy, its purchase price, its acceleration, its range, its luggage space, etc. So just to hammer the point home a little further, to give an example, a manufacturer could build a standard pickup with a gas engine, diesel engine, 3 different EV battery range options, and 2 different PHEV options. Each of those would have its own fuel economy, purchase price, etc. And then the manufacturer would do the same for all of the remaining size classes. So this manufacturer component in NEMS does all of this work before the consumer is even involved. It creates a slate of options for consumers. And then the consumer comes in and they choose which powertrain they want based on how they value each of those attributes listed here. Now, how the consumer values these attributes can vary across size classes. So folks in the market for a pickup truck or an SUV may prioritize luggage space, while somebody shopping for a sedan may prioritize fuel economy. So those changing values are estimated based on real sales data, historical sales data that we analyze, which represents actual consumer decisions that have already been made. So this is a little different from using survey data, which is more focused on what consumers say they're going to do in the future. We really only use actual data of what has happened in the past. So that's all of the the modeling that I'm going to go over in terms of how it works. It's a very compressed explanation. I'm happy to answer more questions, but I'll move on now to some results. So on the left here, we have light duty vehicle sales by powertrain. And on the right, each of the electrified vehicle types are shown separately. One point to note here is that total sales are estimated to stay below 2019 levels for the whole projection. So sales in the US are not projected to grow in general. So when you see growth in the electric sales over here, they're taking more market share. They're not just growing with the market. In the AEO 2022, we project that the combined share of sales of internal combustion engine vehicles, so gas, diesel, flex fuel, natural gas, propane, will drop from 92% in 2021 to 79% in 2050 because of growth in sales of BEVs, fully electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and then hybrids. Throughout the projection period, the 200 and 300-mile range EV sales grow. They increased 5-fold from about 1/3 to around 1.5 million, while sales of PHEVs about triple from 144,000 to 520,000 in 2050. So looking more specifically at, again, battery electric, which is those vehicles that only run on electricity, and then the plug-in hybrids that can still plug in, but also have a gasoline engine on board. Sales are projected to grow from 3 or 4% in 2021 to over 13% in 2050 as battery prices continue falling. And we can think about how that impacts the total number of EVs on the road. We were talking about the stock turnover before and that scrappage. So we project that at that percentage of sales at around 13% in 2050, around 9% of the national vehicle stock will be electric. And that shift is occurring even as that on-road stock is growing from 260 to 290 million vehicles. So EVs are growing with the stock and faster than it. Again, AEO 2022 projects that total EV sales share will be 13% by 2050, and total EV stock share will be 9%. Again, under current policy as of late 2021, and without any major technological breakthroughs. So what drives EV adoption in NEMS? I'll walk through some of the factors and conditions that we model, as well as a couple that we don't include. And this is a very text-intensive slide, I apologize. But before jumping into the factors that we do include, I want to point out, because this is a very common question we get, something that we don't explicitly model in NEMS, and that's manufacturer aspirations and sales targets. So EV adoption isn't entirely consumer driven. The government has long provided policy support to vehicle electrification, whether it's to meet GHG emissions reductions or energy independence goals. If the manufacturers had seen this as a more profitable business model in the first place, with a high likelihood of consumer acceptance, they may have considered moving toward EVs without any government support. But the profitability and consumer acceptance are not necessarily straightforward, and therefore the manufacturers won't commit to creating a new EV market on their own without certainties from the government. So the manufacturers set their ambitions and aspirations, but they heavily caveat them to ensure they aren't really going it alone. You can see some of the caveats they offered in the official press statement from the White House that they gave. This is from President Biden's 40 to 50% EV sales share goal by 2030. There's some from Ford, GM, and Stellantis. They said in order to meet that goal, they need purchase incentives, comprehensive charging network of sufficient density, investments in R&D, and incentives to expand the electric vehicle manufacturing and supply chains in the US. And then again, another group of manufacturers here, they would require a nationwide GHG emission standard, continue investments in infrastructure, and broad consumer incentives for all electric vehicle purchases. So that's just a sample there of kind of the way that it's caveated. It's not to say that the manufacturers won't meet these goals or aspirations, but they are just goals and aspirations. They aren't mandated by any policy, and there's no penalty if they don't achieve these goals. I'll move on now to what we do include in terms of what really drives electrification here, at least in NEMS. So I've got 4 broad categories here: policy, incremental vehicle costs, fuel prices, or how much it costs to drive, and consumer sentiment. I put policy here first. Clearly that overlaps with several of these, or with all 3 of these other categories. But I put it first because it directly impacts all of them, and I think it's a very important driver here. So as we walk through these individually, I'll describe them in a little more detail and show how NEMS models them, but also talk through some of the uncertainties inherent to projecting how these could change over time. So looking at policy, I've got 2 groups here, green and red. Those in green on the top are included in AEO 2022. Those in red are not in AEO 2022. As I mentioned, modeling froze in November 2021, so any policy that was enacted after that cannot have been included in the AEO. Policies can include a broad range of different things. It can range from CAFE fuel economy standards, purchase incentives at federal, state, or municipal levels, or even government purchase and or sales mandates. So looking at what policies we do have in the model, or we did have for AEO 2022, we had the $7,500 tax credit for BEVs and PHEVs, and we had the older CAFE standard. This is from the Trump administration, the SAFE rule. It was not as stringent as the current fuel economy standard. Fuel economy improvements in the model are required to bump up about 1.5% a year. The previous standard was around 5%. Current standard is basically accelerates that improvement to catch up with the pre-SAFE standard. You see that the list of policies here in red is longer than that in green. A number of policy developments have occurred since we completed modeling. Those include a reactivation of California's ZEV mandate, So that's the repeal of SAFE 1 here, as well as EPA reinstating their waiver to be able to enforce that mandate. The bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as a new CAFE standard, and the Inflation Reduction Act, and then finally some evolving state policies. I know you all just mentioned that California ICE vehicle ban, which is not enforceable until the EPA issues them a waiver. I'm happy to talk specifically about some of these if you all have questions about them. I think in general, all of those in red will increase EV sales in our next projection. I can't really comment on how much it will increase the sales because we haven't figured that out yet. And we haven't even, the IRA was just passed, so we haven't even put it all the way into the model yet. But my speculation is that it will increase EV sales. And again, we can talk a little bit more about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, if you all have questions about that, because that one's a little less certain on EV sales impact. So moving on to the next piece, remember I said policy, incremental cost, cost to drive, and then some consumer sentiment. Vehicle purchase price. So the key driver of that incremental cost, or how much more expensive EVs are than gasoline vehicles, is the battery price. On left here, I'm showing retail price equivalent battery prices. This is the projection from AEO 2022. Again, retail price equivalent is what the consumer is paying. This is not how much it costs to manufacture a battery. It's about 50% more expensive for the consumer after stacking on all the different levels of profit and overhead. So we have battery prices dropping by about half in the projection for both PHEVs, the plug-in hybrids, as well as full EVs. They dropped to around $90 a kilowatt hour for BEVs and $230 for PHEVs. So that drives down incremental cost significantly over the projection. Neither of those EVs reach cost parity with gasoline vehicles throughout the projection. And when I say BEVs, I mean 300-mile range electric vehicles. 100-mile range electric vehicles do end up a little cheaper than gasoline vehicles. And then on the right here, there's some uncertainties. So the first I have is technology breakthroughs. So I mentioned solid state batteries before. If there is a breakthrough in battery technology, either solid state, I would consider that a breakthrough if they achieve full solid state and meet the goals they've set for energy density, or some other new technology that we don't know about yet. Battery costs could drop significantly. You could get a whole bunch more range for less money, and that would potentially, make EV adoption accelerate significantly. Again, ultra fast charging capability. If that does happen, if manufacturers and the tech sector are able to come up with something that makes this just like a gas station, that doesn't destroy the grid, where you can come and plug in and you're out in 3 minutes in a full charge, that could change the market considerably. The second item I have here is the raw material supply chain. So it appears that a global material shortage is likely if EV adoption accelerates, as all of these different groups are saying it will. Assuming that mining starts don't ramp up right now, because those are not 2-year ramp ups, that's 5 to 10-year ramp ups to get all that online. If all of that doesn't fall into place, battery prices could reverse their historical decline and start moving up. And that is already, or there are hints of that happening already. 2022 may be the first year of battery price increases since the start of mass EV production. And then a third uncertainty here is deciding whether or not battery cost reductions will go to increasing vehicle range, or if the manufacturers will pass it through as cost reduction. Right now, at least historically, since EVs have hit the market in the past decade or so, almost all of the cost reductions have gone to increasing the range of the vehicle. The vehicles haven't gotten cheaper. Um, the question is whether consumers will accept a stop in the increase of the range in order to get a vehicle that's more affordable. And it's not clear which direction consumers will go on that. Right now in NEMS, we assume that those cost reductions primarily go to reducing the cost of the vehicle. We don't get any 400 or 500-mile range EVs in the model. They stick around 300 or 350 miles by the end. So those are a few of the uncertainties around that incremental cost, at least the battery piece of the incremental cost in NEMS. Now looking at what the actual costs are for EVs. So I pulled this down a few weeks ago from Kelley Blue Book. This is their average transaction prices for vehicles over the past, I think that's 9 months. You see 4 bars here. On the far left is the brown bar. That's all the average non-luxury vehicle transaction price. Green is luxury, yellow is electric, and then I put hybrids on here as well. And then you have the average line in black. So you can see that the yellow bar is right up alongside the green for at least the past 9 months. And this has been the case for most of the past decade, particularly because Tesla dominated sales earlier on. But EVs are currently priced as luxury vehicles, and they primarily participate in the luxury vehicle market. Luxury vehicles account for about 20% of the total vehicle market, and EVs have taken about 15% of that luxury market. So they're doing really well in the luxury space. If we look at the non-luxury segment or mass market, EVs account for less than, it's about 0.5% of sales. So if EVs are really going to reach high levels of adoption, they need to come down in price, whether that means the current offerings need to be cheaper as batteries come down in price, or manufacturers will have to offer options down market, new models. Note that they have done this in the past. The Nissan Leaf has hovered around $30,000 since 2011, but it hasn't taken over its own market segment, likely due to range limitations. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. There needs to be cost parity, but there also needs to be performance parity. It needs to do exactly the same thing as a gasoline vehicle for exactly the same price. And again, we can talk a little bit about fuel savings in a minute, but consumers don't tend to think about the next 7 years of fuel spending and do an economic calculation on payback like that. So moving on to the next condition here, we went through policy, went through that upfront vehicle purchase price, and now we have cost to drive here. So on the right, I'm showing how much more expensive is it to drive a gasoline vehicle versus a 300-mile range EV. And this varies over time in NEMS because we have electricity prices and gasoline prices changing over time. But what this ends up resulting in is about a 50% savings in cost to drive, at least in the projection in NEMS. Assuming a car drives about 12,000 miles a year, that's somewhere between $500 or $1,000 a year in fuel savings. And again, it really depends on the size class and which EV range you chose. The big assumptions behind here, and I think these are really important uncertainties, and we're trying to do some analysis on this now. But NEMS assumes home charging prices, so residential electricity prices, which are considerably lower than those charged for public charging, in particular public fast charging. So if you were to drive only on public fast charging, that cost advantage would drop by half, perhaps even more. And one important note here too is that most folks who live in multi-unit dwellings and apartments are more likely to rely on this expensive public fast charging. So it could potentially be more expensive for low-income people to recharge their vehicles because they'll have to use public fast charging rather than just plugging in their garage at home. One other uncertainty here, and this is more of a NEMSy kind of thing, but future fuel prices are very important assumptions in the model, and they are highly uncertain. So, you know, even recently with the huge spike in gasoline prices, then the quick drop, the model doesn't predict any of those crazy spikes and such. It has a relatively smooth projection for both fossil fuels and electricity. But if that were to change considerably and that dynamic was totally different than what we're projecting, the results would also be different. So I think I'm going to stop there. I think I might have gone over a few minutes of what I told Seth I would do. So any questions?
Members, any questions? You'll have to raise your hand so we can see you. Let's have one microphone, Seth, or how we?
Good morning, Mr. Dwyer. Thank you for your presentation. On slide 20, I did have questions about the model and seeing how the cost of batteries will go down over time. You touched on it in your second uncertainty bullet point, but you know we're plagued with news constantly about mining operations and battery supply and material supply. So with that continued news coming out of these challenges and continue to see limitations, how do you model the cost of a battery going down over the next 25 years?
Right, that's a good question. And again, I have to lean on the fact that the model, at least the battery model, was done in mid-2021. So this supply chain stuff was just starting to ramp up. And I think we're probably going to have to make some modifications to the assumptions there. But the difficulty for us is that we don't have a projection of, you know, individual material prices and the changes in battery chemistries over time. So that's a pretty big uncertainty for us. And we're working with the USGS right now. Sorry, I should probably define that. US Geological Survey, I think is what that stands for, on trying to figure out how those material costs might change in the future. But right, yeah, I'm not sure the battery prices will drop as quickly as they're shown here, especially if the raw material issues persist. Does that answer your question? Sure.
Mr. Dwyer, Russell McMurray, Georgia Department of Transportation. On this point of clarification, on slide 14 and 15, on slide 14, it appears, and this is the clarification I'm seeking, the electric hybrid, as far as new vehicle sales, outpaces battery electric pretty substantially out until the inflection point about 2040. Is that the correct interpretation?
Right. In the AO 2022, the hybrids do outrun EVs.
Thank you.
They do flatline a little bit there as battery prices drop. You can see a clear knee in that hybrid curve. But right, they do outrun the EVs until 2040.
And as in a comparison of that on your next slide, that's just the percentage differences. So battery electric percentage-wise increases at a greater rate, but the volume of electric hybrids are higher from the previous slide.
Okay. So right. So so there's three different vehicle types in the graph on the right. There's electric hybrids, which have no plug at all. That's like your Prius, right? Then the plug-in hybrids in yellow, those are like a Chevy Volt. So that has a plug and a gasoline engine. And then you have the battery electrics, which have no engine, just a plug.
Thank
so
you.
what's shown on the second slide is just the plug-in hybrids and the battery electrics. The electric hybrids with no plugs are not shown on here, but they would be above the battery electric.
Thank you for that
Does that make sense?
clarification. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And just one final, this is a question on your Kelly Blue Book slide on 21. just your notion of why the hybrid alternate energy car sales price seemed to be lower than just the non-luxury cars. You have any insights into why the prices seem to be cheaper?
Yeah, I'm not entirely. So there's a couple factors that may play into that. And again, I I haven't done a full-blown analysis on this, so this is speculation a bit. But hybrids aren't offered, or they're not as available in every vehicle size class, and even by every manufacturer, right? So there's a lot of manufacturer loyalty, first of all, when consumers go out to buy a vehicle. So if you want to go out and buy, a Chevy, the hybrid options are relatively limited. So you're probably not going to buy a hybrid, even if there was, a Prius that was priced at 24 grand. So that's one piece, just the availability and that make model variety that's available. Additionally, it's possible that these aren't as profitable for manufacturers as non-hybrids. So they may be not pushing the hybrid as hard, if that makes sense. The hybrid helps meet CAFE fuel economy standards, but it may not help the bottom line necessarily.
Thank you very much for your insights.
Sure.
Hey, Mr. Dwyer, thank you very much for your testimony today. I actually have another question about slide 21. You said that there was a reduced cost, like 50%. Now, we're talking about fuel operating costs, correct?
Right.
Okay. So at $500 to $1,000 a year, that's just what the reduction in the cost of fuel, basically, be it electric or gasoline, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's the only difference between and the fuel economy differences, of course. But the cost of fuel, that's all I'm including in that savings.
Okay. So then my next question is, in the previous meeting or committee meeting that we had, there was testimony given that said that there was a cheaper electric vehicle availability, I guess. But I'm seeing your slides, and it says here that they're basically luxury price cars. So are you aware of any cheap total EV option available?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Nissan Leaf. That's one that's more affordable. And again, I haven't checked recent prices because they're all over the place. But yeah, I think it's around $30,000. It might be 35 now in today's world, but that's under that average. The Chevy Bolt was, I think that was around 38. So but they discontinued that. I think some of the Hyundai and Kia EVs might cross under that as well. But really, sales are dominated right now by Tesla, and then you've got the Ford Mach-E and the Lightning, and all of those are in the upper 50s starting generally. So there are vehicles available down there at the lower levels, like I said, the Leaf, but they're either not in a size class that consumers are interested in, like a subcompact like the Leaf, or they just don't have the range that the consumer wants. And that's what I was trying to sort of get at when I mentioned both cost and performance parity, where the consumer may not be willing to sacrifice on range in order to get an EV that they can afford, if that makes sense.
No, that's actually exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you.
Sure.
And just Rick Jaspers, one of the co-chairmen, just real quick on we all are curious where you're buying vehicles at. Your luxury, our Ford Lightnings are 85, 90, 95,000, so in our area. But do you have data on delivery vehicles, the last mile, that you offline could get back with us about, of what adoption and use of that segment is? Because that's going to be a very much growing segment I'd like to learn more about.
Right. So those are usually, let's see, you're talking about like your Amazon delivery van kind of size classes?
Sure, yes, sir. All that whole gamut that's moving seemingly very quickly toward the adoption
Right.
of, the total electric vehicle.
Right. Yeah, I guess I could have probably added a slide or two on that, because that's not technically part of light duty vehicles, so that's a different piece of the model altogether. That's part of the freight model. But I'm happy to send some information about that if that's of interest to you
Okay.
all.
Well, thank
But
you.
I see that as much more of a business case or a business decision. So as soon as those EVs pay back on the range of that route, they're going to go for an EV. It's much less based on manufacturer loyalty or amenities in the vehicle. It's just going to be if the cost to drive, pays back the incremental cost within X number of years, we're going to go for it. And so I think that's why they seem to be doing relatively well there, at least in that segment. Anyhow,
Thank you,
sorry.
Senator Gooch.
Good morning, Steve Gooch, State Senator. On slide 22, we're talking about the cost comparison of gasoline versus electricity. Do you have any costs built in to your electrical analysis for the replacement of motor fuel tax? So we roughly pay around 50 cents per gallon of gas or diesel in Georgia if you include the federal, state, and local taxes. This number on here, is it indicative of any kind of a electric fee that would replace that or be the equivalence of that?
So I don't work on the actual fuel price and supply side of the model. I could try and speculate what all they include in that fuel price, but it may be better to have them answer that.
Okay. I guess you really don't know then at this point on the comparison.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, the electricity prices right now are just, what people pay for residential electricity.
Gotcha.
There's no additional EV. We don't even include EV infrastructure costs in that price.
Okay.
For fossil fuels, gas and diesel, I'm not sure exactly how they build those up, or what pieces or components they include.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Are there any
Sure.
other questions? We need to probably move on to the next speaker. Hold on. One last question.
Mr. Dwyer, Larry Walker, Senate District 20. So on this slide here, the questions I think already been asked, but cost to drive, is this just the fuel cost, or is this the full cost to drive, maintenance, depreciation, all that stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So this is only the fuel cost. And the reason for that is because right now we're assuming it's the same maintenance costs across the board. And there's a lot of talk right now about EVs being cheaper. At least they're touted as being cheaper on maintenance. But that isn't really a clear takeaway based on at least some of this, even the basic stuff like Car and Driver reviewing Teslas, where they had to pay to lubricate their brake calipers once a year for $500. Sorts of things like that don't seem to be accounted for, and a lot of the EVs will cost less to maintain claims. So right now we're holding maintenance costs equal. So yeah, they're included in the plot over here, but they're the same, so there's no difference.
All right, thank you.
And we don't do depreciation in the model. After the vehicle is sold, we don't model used vehicles or shifts in how those are sold, so that's not included.
Mr. Dwyer, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We appreciate all the information you've given us, and it's a lot to chew on. So at this time, we're going to move on to our next presenter, and we'd like to ask Angela Holland to come forward from the Georgia Convenience Store Association. Would you like to stand at the podium or at the table? Either way, if you'd like to present from there. It's fine right there, wherever you're most comfortable. Will you be needing the PowerPoint? Okay. Well, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me to continue the electric vehicle charging conversation. My name is Angela Holland, and I serve as the president of the Association of Convenience Stores. We represent large chains as well as small multi-generational businesses in urban, suburban, and rural areas. I would be remiss if I didn't start by publicly thanking Chairman Powell for introducing electric vehicle charging legislation during the 2022 session. Chairman Parsons and Subcommittee Chair Joseph Gullett and the EUT committee members for their incredible work on the issue. And I'd also like to thank Chairman Cowsert as well and Chairman Gooch for sponsoring study committee legislation. So thank you, fellas. On behalf of my members, I appreciate the opportunity to continue the conversation, your time and diligence on studying this issue, and we look forward to being a part of the process of making sure Georgia gets this right. The crux of the bill that Alan Powell introduced last year did several things. It allowed the resale of power per kilowatt with language that didn't violate the Territorial Act. It asked for the major utility company in our state to provide an electric vehicle charging rate. And it would have required the major utility company in our state to provide charging stations to the motoring public on a level and competitive platform with other companies in the business. And it would have denied the electric suppliers from allocating to or recovering from ratepayers the cost to provide, own, operate, or maintain electric vehicle charging equipment, very similar to the way they currently operate in the outdoor lighting business. Additionally, it encouraged the EMCs and the municipalities to develop a business vehicle charging rate for private electric vehicle charging providers. The convenience store industry in Georgia is robust. Our industry provides more than 6,600 locations in Georgia, equating to one store in every 9 square miles. And when you look at the state map, and there's one provided in the packet, the only area on the map that doesn't have a convenience store is the Okefenokee Swamp. Additionally, according to the Department of Agriculture, we provide nearly 150,000 gas pumps for motorists. Providing fuel for motorists is our business. Whether it's gas, ethanol, diesel, biodiesel, hydrogen, or natural gas, whether the fuel is a natural fossil fuel or a man-made fuel, it's our job to sell fuel to motorists. And I mentioned biodiesel. I don't know if you know exactly what that is, but it's produced and blended with diesel fuel to make it environmentally friendly. It's kitchen grease and cow manure, and we sell it. So we are fuel agnostic. We sell all these types of fuels competitively in an open market, and we're the only commodity priced at the street. And street pricing is not a requirement. We do that to create competition so that motorists know where to find fuel and so that they know what it will cost to fill them up and to give them an opportunity to choose what they want. If the federal government and automobile dealers or automobile manufacturers had announced earlier in the year that the shift was going to be towards hydrogen or natural gas powered vehicles, then our industry would have already been making efforts towards meeting those needs. However, they decided to push electric vehicles. And currently, the law discourages investment in electric vehicle charging stations. Retailers can't resell power. They can't compete with a monopoly, and they can't resell a product if they don't know the cost they pay for that product. When Georgia makes those changes, retailers will get into the electric vehicle charging market because that's what we do and that's who we are. We're an ever-evolving market, and we fuel and will continue to fuel motorists. At the August 24th meeting, Janine Miller with the Georgia DOT stated that in order to utilize federal funds, locations must be NEVI compliant. Although Georgia has over 3,800 charging stations, only 12 are NEVI compliant. So what does NEVI compliance mean? Charging infrastructure has to meet at least 3 criteria factors. They must be located within 1 mile of the interstate exit and no more than 50 miles apart. With 1 in every square miles, I believe our locations satisfy that. They must have at least 4 DC fast chargers capable of simultaneously charging 4 vehicles, and they must have a minimum capability at or above 600 kilowatts and support at least 150 kilowatts per port simultaneously across 4 ports. By utilizing Georgia's current convenience store infrastructure, the Georgia DOT will be able to successfully utilize their federal funding. However, there will be a need for private businesses to subsidize the infrastructure. And the only way for a business owner to recover their cost is to be able to resell power competitively in an open market. So what makes Georgia's convenience stores the most sensible place to purchase motor fuel? Well, other than the fact that we've been doing it for over 100 years and doing it well, we're invested in the infrastructure, and it's how we generate revenue. In an article written in the New York Times on August 16th, which is included in that packet, the writer addressed the frustrating hassle posed to EV drivers regarding non-functioning charging stations. Another article published by the Oil Price Information Service referenced inadequate infrastructure, citing a decline in customer satisfaction with level 2 charging. Multiple surveys, studies by companies such as Plug-in America, Cool the Earth, EV Plug Share, and JD Power have also been implemented. And it was reported also in that New York Times article that 23% of the public charging stations in San Francisco Bay Area were broken. Many chargers now sit in parking lots or in front of locations where it's often no one to turn to for help when chargers don't work. There's always a convenience store attendant. For reference, I included that article in there, and I believe there's another NEVI compliance is that those stations have to be compliant at least 95% of the time. Convenience stores are a location where that can happen, at least happen faster than where there's no one to attend those stations. Now, I also realize that one of the biggest issues for this committee will be taxing the resale of the kilowatt. And I'd like to mention that prior to 2008, the sales tax on fuel was collected at the retail level. House Bill 219, which became effective January 1, 2008, changed this tax structure from the retail level to the wholesale level. My members believe the same tax structure will be beneficial not only to the consumer, but to the state, most particularly the Department of Revenue, as they would be tasked with the auditing, collecting, etc. of a new tax. And so with that, I thank you for your willingness to continue this conversation and to work diligently to get this right. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Real quick, you talking about gas tax and the collection of it at the retail level prior to 2008. Now it's done at the wholesale rate. How do you envision that working with the EV charging stations? Will the convenience stores collect a fee that we apply legislatively, or how do you see that working best for the convenience store operators? And my question is going to lead to, if you have a bank of charging stations, let's say you add 6 fast chargers adjacent to your convenience store, you're probably going to need a separate meter system. Although you may just have 1 or 2 chargers attached to a convenience store and not have to add additional meters. You may be able to do it through the existing metering system. So how would you be able to measure the kilowatts and be able to tax it? Would you collect it there, or would you want the power company to collect it and submit it?
I think it would probably be more beneficial to the state if the power company collected it and remitted it. Number one, there's a whole lot less of those than there are going to be these stations, because it's not just going to be the 6,600 convenience stores in the state that are going to put in charging stations. We've already got 4,300 in other, different kinds of locations. So I guess my thought process is very similar to the thought process that's already in our industry, for it to be prepaid tax when it gets to the retailer.
So if some of the charging stations are metered separately, that probably would be a simple task for the power company. But if the charging station were wired into an existing service that's already at an existing convenience store, it would be almost impossible for the power company to sort out how much electricity is going through that charging station unless there's some kind of a built-in metering system, what I'm not familiar with. And then the power company would then be responsible for collecting a tax on the other side of their meter, which they don't currently do. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so I had that same thought too. So if the power company offers, and they do, it was testified last session, or the 24th, that they offer a PEV rate. So that already has to be sub-metered, right, in order for them to extend that rate that they currently offer to a consumer. So if they're going to have and we're asking for a rate, right, you got to be able to know what you're purchasing in order to resell it. So it would make sense then to me that it would be sub-metered. And I don't have all the answers, I guess, to how does that work.
Right. One last question. Currently, the Department of Agriculture comes around and checks your pumps.
Correct.
They measure volumes and accuracy of those meters.
Correct.
Who do you envision doing that for an EV station? How would you know that kilowatt meter is being measured correctly? Who's going to be the cop for that besides Randy Robertson?
Who measures those now, and who's
Department of Ag, right?
No, but who measures power meters now? Who's the cop for that?
We'll probably ask that question with the power companies when they come up on stage. I'm just wondering if you have an opinion on that. Do you want us to create another agency for that? Do we do it under an existing agency? Do we do it under the PSC? Or do you just let it sort of go unchecked?
You can't let it go unchecked.
Okay.
It absolutely would need to be checked. But who should be responsible for that? I think that's...
Yeah, I don't know either.
That's a bigger question for somebody smarter than I am.
Thank you. For what it's worth, I think you are going to be a vital role in this infrastructure rollout and being able to charge these electric vehicles. So thank you for being here and being cooperative and helping us figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything I can any information I can dig up for you, I will do that.
Thank you for being here, Angela. We all appreciate the work your convenience stores do across the state. On your handout, you had legislative changes, to be competitive. And number 2, you didn't really talk about your desire for having a competitive rate structure or a different, which kind of fits into Senator Gooch's being able to have a different meter that you get. Could you expound on what your thoughts are, your association are on that?
Yeah, I think one of the issues really is a demand charge, and that comes after the fact. So it's almost, I mean, we know what we pay for most fuels now. Before you put it in the ground, you know what you've purchased it at, so you know what you have to charge for that. And so in order to resell power, right now you pay for that after the fact. So what is the price for it, and how can you resell it? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Charge Ahead Partnership can talk about that in a little more depth.
Frank again.
Good morning, Ms. Holland. Thank you for your testimony. I want to congratulate my state rep, Chairman Powell, for introducing the ability to you to be able to sell electricity at the pump. That's a great idea. What's something that we need to do. When I heard Mr. Weber said they talk about the prices per electricity, you know, and he said, well, the home charging was cheaper than doing the fast chargers and the things there. And for me, I think that's a terrible service that we would be providing to the public and would put our convenience stores at a significant disadvantage. One of the things that you mentioned in your testimony was y'all put signs up to make competitiveness for the price of fuel, you know, whether it be diesel or gas or whatever, and you let the public know, hey, this store over here is selling it for that, and that one's selling it for this. It's a great marketing thing, and it helps. What I want to do is I want to try to help you with real-time pricing, because I see that, you know, my goal here is to help all our citizens in Georgia and not add to our peak electric sales, but where you can be part of that solution by putting on a sign, real-time pricing, hour by hour or minute by minute on what you do. Is that something that you think the convenience stores would embrace on handling that so that, you know, if you know what your cost is, you can put that out there to the public so that the public can see, hey, I need to charge in the morning, or I need to charge the middle of the night or something like that, instead of coming by your station when we're at a high demand, summertime, you know, we've had our peak for the state and killing our infrastructure.
And I truly believe that's one of those evolution things that's going to happen over time, right? You're going to have to train a new driver with a new vehicle, and here are the best times to fuel up. And I think that is something that will evolve.
So you think this association would support real-time pricing?
I think that it just depends on how in-depth that is, I think, for the marketplace to do. I mean, right now, you know, and one of the first things that I did when I started with the association was spent some time with some of our wholesale members that resell fuel, and they have real-time pricing every few minutes on the, you know, the changes in the fuel market and the changes in the oil. And so that is all very real-time pricing for them. They know when they're purchased that. They know what they have to resell that at. And so it's something they sort of do with fuel, but they don't change those fuel prices real time, right? They change those fuel prices when they bring a tanker in. So for them, it is real time. So I don't know the answer to that question.
What I'm trying to get you to understand, and here's where I want to push the convenience stores and other retailers too, is it's very important for the public to understand if we can get real-time pricing where you know what your cost is at that point in time, you can move up and down your price at the pump, so to speak, for electricity. Because for me, we need to make sure that we're not destroying our network of generation, transmission, and distribution. And that's critical to making sure these electric vehicles are helping the state, not hurting us.
Very similar to using the Peach Pass, right? It's more expensive between 5 and 7.
Yes,
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate your comments today. And one of the things that I think the committee needs to understand is that the investment in Georgia of your membership and a lot of your non-membership is in the retail sales. This is something we've relied on for years. There's billions of dollars in investment in big business in the state of Georgia on these locations. Right now, one of the primary one of the primary retail products is petroleum products. And thanks to you explaining to me what biodiesel was, that explains what the hell comes out of Washington when they determine their policies about certain things. But at this particular point, what we're trying to do is move forward. I listened to some of the comments from some of my colleagues a while ago about specifics. One of the things that I'm a believer, and I think a lot of the legislators are, that the tier system of business works pretty good. This prevents monopolies, it prevents or it causes good service, quite frankly. This is something that the C-store in the retail industry, that they are in prime position to furnish this product by providing these chargers. One of the questions that was asked a while ago was about the metering, about who would pay for what. Right now, all of these C-stores, they pay for their own gas systems. All the intricate work from the underground utility tanks to the pumps to the computers to everything else. And I don't visualize it being much different. The power companies today are the manufacturers. They produce the power and they distribute the power. They would then do that, and it would be up to this committee and to make a recommendation, and to future legislators and their delegated powers to set forth a system so that it is in the best interest of the consumers of this state, so that we don't wind up with a lot of extra costs being added to the rate base to our homeowner bills and such as that. Let this thing be separated. Would you feel that's pretty well true?
If you believe it to be true. Mr.
That is
Chairman.
a biodiesel
Yes.
answer if I've ever heard it. Thank you, dear.
Hi, Ms. Holland. I'm Tricia Pridemore, and I chair the Georgia Public Service Commission. I don't believe you and I have met, but I was a big fan and friend of Jim Tudor. So I did have a couple of questions about your flyer. When you talk about current electric vehicle charging obstacles, there's 3 things listed, and they're all under the purview of the PSC regulated electric provider, Georgia Power. So is it the intent of the convenience stores to become a power generator?
No, a reseller. So, and I was very much chastised last legislative session for using the term wholesale retail. And I understand now how that's defined in the Territorial Act. But no, we would envision the power company being the wholesaler or the company that's providing the fuel, and the retail operation with the charger reselling. And so we define wholesale retail much differently than you do in the Territorial Act. So that's why we've kind of shied away from using those terms. But no, not in the generation business, no.
But it's not the C-store's intent to generate. What about transmit? Moving it from a generation source to a substation into the high voltage charger that's in the ground?
Currently, I believe the intent of the convenience store operator is to resell from that charging station to a motorist. I don't believe there's any intent at the moment to generate our own power or to move around power or to be in the power business. I think we have enough on our plate reselling what we resell.
So the C-store's intent then is for the electric utilities to generate, transmit, and move that power to that high voltage charging station at your location, correct?
That is what I currently believe. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Have the C-stores done any work to look at other states and the proximity that high voltage charging stations need to be away from a fuel tank?
I know that there is work being done on that. I know that there's some fire compliance standards that are going to be put out. And so, yes, not every single location in the state will have the acreage to do that. So, yes, that is a consideration at the moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Holland.
Just to let everyone know, we're 20 minutes behind the schedule, so we're going to have to pick it up. Randy Robertson, you're next, and then is that Senator Lucas
Yes.
in the back? All right, you'll be the last speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. Is there a model in the United States now where convenience stores are providing this type of service to EVs and hybrids that are coming onto their property?
So there are 38 states in the United States currently that can resell power. And I do believe that, if I'm not mistaken, Louisiana was the first state this year to pass some legislation that would put the power company on more of a level playing field, and they are in a regulated power industry.
It's a regulated power industry, but also, according to your notes, the governor has signed legislation to manage the cost, to make it a little more clear to the consumer as to what they'll be paying. Is that correct?
Correct, and
So-
I believe that just happened this last legislative
Right.
session.
So what your proposal today is you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, right? You're trying to take models that are used in other states and possibly using those same models here. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe it's the intent of the Charge Ahead partnership, which I know they're testifying a little later this afternoon, for this to be very similar across the whole country at some point in time, for it to be very similar in all the states,
Okay, thank you.
so that there's consistency as we travel from state to state in our
Yeah.
vehicles.
And
Yes.
none of your current convenience store partners, you aren't refining oil on the property. You're not pumping it out of the ground, refining it, and doing all this, right? You're selling a product that is brought in, put in the ground, and then you're selling it to the consumer that comes in and needs it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And we're reselling kitchen grease.
Correct. Thank you.
Met with the transmission have you met with the transmission distribution folks, the Georgia Power, the EMC? And have y'all come to any conclusion about how power is gonna be paid for? They generate power. And the last argument I heard, people wanted to be able to get it and they not provide power, say, in the rural areas, a charging station less than what they are doing it for. In other words, less than the convenience stores, the racetrack, what they're selling it for.
So we did have some discussions with them last year, obviously with the bill that was introduced, and so I guess it's our ask that the power company be on a level playing field and sell it similar to the way they do outdoor energy or outdoor lighting right now, and to not allow them to create a monopoly in that space, and to be competitive with other entities that would be able to resell power.
The reason I ask that, you got racetrack in large communities.
Yes.
I represent Washington County, Twiggs, and Wilkes. I don't have a racetrack. Good to have a convenience store. But the problem is, how do you take the folks who are in the business, who make money, generating power, and then put them on a level playing field with the convenience stores and the racetrack, and they got to sell it to you?
I guess I'm a little confused about the question.
The question is, how do you take a Georgia Power or a EMC who's generating power, and who might be putting units out in rural Georgia where you don't have the service station to have the charging station? How do you put them on a level field with you in the convenience store or the racetrack, where they're putting it out in rural Georgia, and you have to buy that power from them because people pay to get the power generated and have to pay the bill to get power?
So to set it up as so that, I guess our request would be for that Georgia Power that was what was in the bill, the one largest utility company in the state, to set that up as a third party, so that they were purchasing the power from themselves at the same rate that a retailer would be purchasing the power for resale. And that was the crux of the bill that Chairman Powell represented last session. And I do understand the concern about rural Georgia, and I think that's one of that's one of the biggest concerns with the federal funding as well, and that these are every 50 miles on interstates and on rural highways. And I believe that as this evolves, you will see some of those smaller rural stores put those charging stations in, especially as, if a lot of uncertainties, right? A lot of uncertainties around the vehicles. But once you have the need there for it, I likened it to, and I spent some time studying the evolution of, the Model T, and when gas came out and gas pumps and convenience stores or gas stations were created in the first place. And I think you'll see that same sort of evolution. And this is a brand new industry for our country.
Thank you, Angela. And members, I don't have to remind you, Angela Holland is probably the most accessible, or one of our most accessible directors, and we appreciate it. So if you have other questions, we're going to let you. We've got to move on. I know you're going to be here during lunch and whatever. We'll be glad to answer your question. Next up, Jay Smith from Charge Ahead Partnerships.
I'll go through my remarks and then I'll hopefully touch on a couple of those questions that Angela punted to me. So I'll tackle those. Good morning, Chairmans Gooch and Jaspers, and members of the committee. Thanks for taking the time to have these meetings. You guys are doing it right. You're studying this issue. It's complex. I wish I could say all states are taking this approach. You really should be commended. As stated, my name is Jay Smith. I'm Executive Director of Charge Ahead Partnership, a consortium of businesses, organizations, and individuals who really are advocating for the rapid expansion of the EV charging network across this country. In fact, our members include gas stations, as does Angela's, convenience stores, truck stops, grocery stores, many of the very same businesses that are in the liquid fuels business right now and would like to provide the same for electric vehicles. Our membership and supporters also include companies who are not retailers, but understand that the more private investment that we can get into EV charging, the faster that this market will grow. As you know, a large number of EV drivers currently are charging their vehicles in their homes, and that is a great solution if you have 8 to 10 hours to fully charge. They're using slow chargers, but really to meet the anticipated growing demand of EVs that we expect to see in the decades ahead, we're really looking for and advocating for a high-speed charge station model. Recharging your vehicle should be as simple as it is getting gas today for your gas-powered car. And it's our hope that the recommendations that come out of this committee will lead to that outcome. But to get to that point, it's important to understand why retailers have been hesitant so far to kind of jump into that EV charging business. You'd think that they would really seize that opportunity to own and operate chargers at their locations. Companies like many of the ones I represent, they already have the real estate in the right locations, convenient for drivers. They have the amenities that drivers have come to expect. And as talked about earlier, have a system of transparent pricing that drivers really want to see in making those kinds of choices. Unfortunately, there are two primary barriers to companies getting into the EV charging business. First, they simply cannot compete with power companies that are able to subsidize their costs of EV chargers and the electricity to recharge using money from ratepayers. And second, as talked about earlier, the rate structure for EV charging, which does include substantial fees, demand charges, which we'll talk about, is really not workable for businesses to recoup these costs from EV drivers, especially when power companies operating their EV chargers do not pass on, don't charge themselves a demand charge and don't pass that on to the driver. As this committee and ultimately you and your colleagues in the legislature examine this issue in Georgia, you really need to ask the question, does Georgia want to have a model that is built on a monopoly utility in EV charging, or do you want a model that is based on private investment? And I'm here to really tell you that you really cannot have both. It really must be one or the other. Retailers are willing to invest capital to develop EV charging stations to meet market demands, but they will not make that investment if power companies, using ratepayers' money, are going to be able to compete with retailers. Subsidizing with ratepayers' money the ownership and operation of EV chargers gives power companies an insurmountable business advantage with regard to price that EV drivers would pay. They could charge drivers nothing and still be guaranteed a profit. That's what we're up against. We're not looking to keep utilities out of the EV charging market. Instead, retailers want to partner with them to deliver power to drivers who need it. Power companies and retailers can and should work together on this. Each has a role to play. Power companies should do what they do best, make power, and they should strengthen the grid to deliver that power to the locations where it's needed. And they're going to make good money doing that. And then let fuel retailers do what they do best, deliver fuel to drivers. The fuel retailers that are part of our organization, as mentioned earlier, are fuel agnostic. Whether you need gasoline, diesel, hydrogen, or in this case electrons, they're in the business of providing drivers with whatever type of fuel that they need. But to do so, we must remove the obstacles in the way of private investment stepping up to the plate to bring more EV charging stations to Georgia. This is not an anti-utility position. This is a pro-consumer, pro-driver position. It brings competition and consumer choice to the EV charging industry. So how do we do that? First, third-party power providers reselling electricity for the purpose of EV charging should be allowed to do so without being deemed a utility company. Simply allowing EV charging providers to charge by the kilowatt hour rather than by the minute is a simple change that would be consistent with nearly all other states. Second, businesses that want to get into the EV charging business need to have the confidence that there's a level playing field and that they will not be competing against monopolies that are being bankrolled by captive ratepayers. Unless Georgia wants a utility monopoly model for EV charging, it should prohibit rate basing for EV charger ownership and operation. Continuing to allow rate basing of EV charging operations sends a loud and clear message to businesses who otherwise would be happy to invest in expanding Georgia's EV marketplace. It tells them, don't waste your money here. When publicly regulated monopolies can rate base their customers to compete in the EV charging market, they hold the power to drive small businesses, entrepreneurs, and EV charging retailers out of business. With that threat looming over the marketplace, businesses will not invest in EV charging. Right now, Georgia Power is seeking permission to raise rates by 12% over the next 3 years to the tune of about $2.8 billion, a hefty hike that every resident will notice. We should not be adding the cost of building, owning, and operating EV charging stations to the list of things that average Georgians want to pay for. It just doesn't make sense to ask that of ratepayers when the private sector, private retailers, are willing to pay for that themselves. And we can get there if rate basing is eliminated. And third, in order for the EV charging marketplace to grow, we need a transparent, common sense rate structure. This gets into the demand charge we talked about earlier. The current rate structure makes it economically impossible for private third-party providers to offer EV charging. Power companies levy these demand charges as part of any business's monthly power bill. These charges are based on the peak demand of electricity at any time in a billing cycle. With high-speed EV chargers pulling a large amount of kilowatts all at once, the demand charge can cause a company's power bill to skyrocket, even if they only have one customer charge up. Georgia DOT recognizes this as an issue, and as noted on page 33 of their National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI plan, we hope this gets worked out at the PSC in the current rate case, but if not, we would look to the legislature to tackle this issue. Demand charges simply do not make sense when it comes to EV charging, especially when this marketplace is in its infancy. There aren't enough EVs on the road right now for a business owner to confidently take on the risk of a large demand charge. As long as these charges threaten profitability of an EV charging business, investors will still steer clear of Georgia. As I've said before, retailers are not seeking to keep power companies like Georgia Power, EMCs, or MEAG out of the EV charging business. Our coalition is all about leveling the playing field. our members welcome competition. But it must be competition operating with the same rates, terms, and conditions that retailers are operating on. If the power company wants to open charging stations, we believe this is best done as a separate, non-regulated subsidiary so that you can ensure that all EV charging providers, including the power companies, are operating under the same rules. This model has been used successfully in both the telecom and natural gas markets here. In fact, the legislature set up a requirement of a separate subsidiary in the natural gas market when AGL unbundled its distribution and transmission service. Aside from the competitive disadvantage on price, just think about the business conflict you're creating by having retailers competing with power companies for EV drivers charging under the current structure. You have retailers like a racetrack or a Quick Trip required to put in a request for additional power to one of their locations for an EV charger, telegraphing to their competitor of their plans. Then a racetrack or Quick Trip must rely on that same competitor to work quickly to make that site ready for an EV charger and hope that the power company doesn't slow roll that and put in one of their own nearby. That scenario alone should serve as a red flag and motivate you to require power companies to set up this separate subsidiary if they want to compete with retailers in this space. Over the past 9 months or so, I've heard some say that the proposals like this and the idea of opening up the EV charging marketplace to more participants is premature and not really needed while there's so few electric vehicles on the road today. I would argue that the longer we wait to create an environment where third parties can compete for EV drivers' business, the more difficult it will be for them to get into that market in the long run and to compete. It's also worth noting that later this year, there's been a little bit of talk earlier about the funding coming down. Georgia is slated to receive the first portion of its $135 million in federal funds for EV charging infrastructure. That's spread over 5 years. The federal agencies dispersing those funds have made it very clear that that money should be used to incentivize private investment and encourage competition. I've looked at NEVI plans across the country, and I must say that Georgia actually has one of the best. Georgia's NEVI plan wants to encourage private investment and has embraced much of what the federal government has said with how those funds should be distributed. They see retailers as a big part of that solution. And I just want to real quickly read from page 47 of Georgia DOT's plan. Quote, convenience store and gas station operators are logical candidates to offer charging services for EVs, given that they are currently providing fueling services to the nation's drivers. Additionally, their business model aligns well with NEVI requirements, including accessibility 24 hours a day, amenities, attendants who can monitor and rapidly report and remedy EVSE operational issues, and cybersecurity for payment of EV charging fees. Now, we just need Georgia's policies around EV charging to be consistent with that vision. To wrap up my remarks, I want to make an observation. I believe this committee's recommendations will chart one of two courses. Either you will endorse the utility monopoly model, or you'll enable private investment in the EV charging marketplace. It's nearly impossible to do both. The EV charging marketplace is going to evolve in the coming decades with faster chargers, new business models, and approaches that we haven't even considered yet. The private market, not a regulated utility, is best suited to experiment and find the most innovative approaches that benefit drivers and Georgia's transportation system. Thanks for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions. I did want to clarify one thing that was mentioned earlier about what other states are doing and Louisiana. Louisiana did pass a bill this past year, signed into law. It does not solve everything. In fact, they had a existing rate case that is going on. So a lot of what the legislature did was directing kind of to the PSC in Louisiana how to address those things, with the promise that if the PSC in its current case, they didn't want to supersede an existing case that was already in the works, that they would then go back next year to resolve it. But the vision they have sent out is what Angela Holland had mentioned earlier about addressing things like the rate basing and demand charges. So just wanted to clarify that. I will say this in terms of using other states as examples. Georgia and Florida last year were basically the only two states that started to look at this. And so you are kind of on the front line of that. But I will say, Charge Ahead Partnership, we are working in a number of states across the country. This is an issue that in 2023 will get resolved state by state, and you guys are going to be kind of at the forefront of that.
Thank you. Can you tell us who your partners are? You said it was a Charge Ahead Partnership. Can you give us some names of who the members are that?
Sure, absolutely. We list all of our members on our website, chargeaheadpartnership.com. We represent the National Grocers Association, so all those grocery stores that you would think of that. Quick Trip, Racetrack, Circle K from the kind of retail. Pilot, you're going to hear from Travel Centers of America, I believe, next. And then even some that are not in the refueling business. Blink, they're in the EV charging business. And so they're members as well. It's probably 80-some members. They're all on our website.
Okay. I think we have questions from the PSC.
Hi, Mr. Smith. Tricia Pridemore. I chair the Georgia Public Service Commission. We've never met, but it's nice to see you today.
Nice to meet you.
So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your comments. First thing, are you familiar with the 2022 Georgia Power rate case?
I'm not a regulatory attorney, but I'm aware of the case that's going on, and a lot of these issues with demand charges. We're hoping are going to be tackled in that as well.
Okay, so I'm quite familiar with it, as are my colleagues. So the way that the rate case is structured, as filed under the guidance of the PSC by Georgia Power, is that it is only for what we call make-ready and desert charging. There are 69 charging stations within Georgia Power's network. Currently, there's 149 total of the 3,776 charging stations currently operating in Georgia today. So it is a sliver. It's less than 3%. And that includes not just Georgia Power, but all the electric utilities and what they manage. So there's no rate recovery that's set up in this rate case that specifically drives to help the electric utilities continue to try to get in your members' business. That's certainly not it. It is there strictly for the transmission and generation needs to get to that charging station wherever it is that your members would want to put it. So I just want to make sure that we're real clear on that. It is a sliver of what it seems like your members are trying to accomplish. With that, there are currently 3 EV tariffs that the Georgia Public Service Commission has set forward that Georgia Power operates under. And only one of those has a demand charge. And I think what we ought to do is on the break, you and I get together and let's talk about that demand charge a little bit more, just so I'm sure that your members are clear on that. But there are 3 existing EV tariffs today, and only one of them has a demand charge. It does have a max ceiling on it by KW, and we can talk about that as well. That got refiled, but they're not seeking any change to that in this 2022 rate case. So first and foremost, thank you for coming and thank you for your comments. But I wanted to make sure that you were aware that who I am, and we can talk on breaks. We can clear some things up.
The one thing thank you for those comments. I really appreciate that. When we're looking at the number of charging stations across Georgia, and you cite a very small sliver, I think it's important that we differentiate fast chargers and slow chargers. Most of those thousands of chargers across Georgia are level 2 and below. They're slow chargers. The future, and what Georgia Power and others have gotten into, we're talking about fast chargers. That's where the future is. In fact, the fast charger of today will be obsolete probably in a few years. And so what we're trying to do is look at future growth. When we talk about those thousands, and I can pull into a Starbucks, and while I'm in there getting, I don't drink coffee, but if you're in there getting a gift card for somebody who drinks coffee, and you can plug in while they're there at Starbucks, you may get 3 or 4 or 5 extra miles of charge while you're sitting there. That's kind of an amenity bringing in. So I just want to make sure we're not talking about those as the long-term solution for range anxiety and long road travel, those kinds of things. So just want to make sure that we're all understanding the distinction. We are really talking about what retailers want to get into is the fast charger model. With regard to the demand charges, you know, power companies, you know, Georgia Power, our friends here, they have rate-based already EV chargers, the ownership of machines, and the operations and the ongoing maintenance. In fact, I've seen commercials of Georgia Power and power companies across the country advertising their fast charging stations. That is a commercial, and those types of things are generally built into a rate base. And it's that type of level of things that are the competition. That if it were a separate subsidiary, there would be a clear line, and those types of things would make it a more level playing field. So I do welcome the conversation. I'd look forward to that at break.
To your point, so everyone on the committee is clear. There are only 69 Georgia Power charging stations in the state. They were done for what's called desert charging. Senator Lucas brought up a point about his district and the importance of being able to charge in his district. That's what has been rate-based. So it's not as if Georgia Power is rate-basing under the approval of the Georgia Public Service Commission to go out and compete with private business in this arena. Fast charging, slow charging, whichever. It is there for desert charging and what we call make ready, which is to get everything to the ground so your members can put a charging station on top of it.
Yes, sir. I just have a quick question. I'll pass it on. So, you know, at these meetings, we get to talk to people at night and learn from others. And I guess I heard last night other state power generators, such as Duke Power and others, are in EV. Do they have separate entities? The other states that you work in, where a power provider has created separate entities to be able to do this?
Most of them are in the business just as the model is here in Georgia today. Minnesota just put it, you know, the power company, I think it's Xcel Energy in Minnesota, just put in a rate case to rate base to the, you know, 700 fast chargers, and are seeking to have that recovered. So I would say no, most power companies are operating under this model until that model gets changed, and it will be getting changed across the states because there isn't going to be enough ratepayer funding to solve this problem. And the federal government recognizes that with the NEVI funds. You know, NEVI funds are a great opportunity to use that money to incentivize faster getting to rural areas, for example. Mr. Lucas, I believe, you know, those are the areas that I would venture a guess that there are gas stations in his district, and those customers in rural areas, just like a grocery store or a gas station, may have had to travel an extra mile earlier on, but eventually the market responds when there is not a barrier to that response.
Thank you, Chairman Jeffers. Quick question. You mentioned a possibility of a utility slow rolling service to someone. Do you know of any case where that has happened when it comes to serving any of your people that you work with, where they've slow rolled a?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just a theoretical concern. I've heard from members who, you know, have the intention of, we want to install, you know, a lot of people will, you know, a question, not to get off on a tangent, but a question I often get is, how can you say that this model won't work? I went to a pilot Flying J and I saw an EV charger there. So if they're there, then what you're saying that it can't happen is just false. And so they're kind of on the front end, and they're just trying to learn the business. They're not making money. They're hoping that legislatures and PSCs will address this issue, and they get into it, and they're using it almost as market research. But in so doing, in trying to get chargers put in, I have heard cases where they're like, now, you know, we can't get this done, or the power company says it's going to be this many years before we can actually get power to your location. I don't want to say that it's so that they can install one themselves across the street, but that is a concern that retailers have, that you're basically relying on your competitor with this unlevel playing field to get into that market. It's a concern that retailers have seen and continue to have.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other members? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. One thing we're going to warn members, we're going to push ahead through our break because we love asking questions, so we're going to have to do that. So next up, Dean Bushy from Travel Centers USA.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. This is going to be a case study. So you've heard the business case arguments on demand charging, rate basing, how we can get into the game, and NEVI funding, and how NEVI funding is just a very small sliver of what it's going to require to get all these fast DC chargers out there. This is going to be more of a good story about my company, which is, I think, amazing, and how we would love to invest in Georgia. We're looking at all the states. Where can we roll out our chargers? So this is a very important distinction. Yes, sir. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. All right, so good morning, Chairman Jasper and Gooch and the members of the committee. My name is Dr. Dean Bushy. I'm the Senior Vice President of Sustainability at Travel Centers of America. We're the nation's largest publicly traded full-service truck stop and service centers, serving 275 different locations in 44 states, including 11 sites right here in Georgia. Georgia is very critical as I look at where I'm going to place my charging infrastructure. I also love Georgia, but I have to say I am a Clemson fan. So just for all you, sorry about that. Should I just, all right. That's all right. We don't have a quarterback, so that's okay. All right. So I always try to remember who my customers are, and I'm sure you remember who your constituents are. Our customers are our highway motorists who stop at our rest stops. We're along the major highways. We're not in the neighborhoods. We're not where you can charge from home. We're looking at those drivers that are driving more than 80 or 100 miles. They have to stop and charge. We also service our professional drivers, obviously. Our professional drivers are very important. And I think one of the things we have not discussed today is what happens when you start electrifying medium and heavy duty trucks and start plugging at that rate. So we service our professional drivers also. What do we offer? We offer diesel, fuel, whether it's gasoline. We offer electrons. We've already installed fast DC charging stations at 5 of our sites, and we're experimenting in more. We have hydrogen. We have a renewable diesel, renewable natural gas, and biodiesel. So any form of fuel that might get you from point A to point B. I like to say we facilitate the movement of goods and people across America and across the state. So it's a really important, it's a really cool job. Understand we are also the largest sites. We average 20 to 25 acres per site, which means that we really offer all of those amenities that you might want. We have clean bathrooms, we're well lit, we have parking lots, we have truck parking, we have Starbucks, we have Popeyes, we have full service restaurants, we have shower facilities, we have washing machines. We offer all of those that the truck drivers would want, obviously, but also that you would stop and get your car charged at the Travel Centers of America sites. I lead both the ESG division of Travel Centers of America and the ETA division. ETA was created to look at alternative fuels for Travel Centers of America. Obviously, our major margin right now, or our major driver, is the volume in diesel. And I saw the slides earlier, and I'll tell you now, from just a statistic perspective, our diesel volume is over our peak of 2019 already. So America's back on the road. That's what I'm telling you. ETA was created to look at alternative fuels. I mean, if we're really going to reduce the carbon footprint and play in the game and be environmentally friendly, we need to look at alternative fuels, whether it is hydrogen or electrification or renewable natural gas or what have you not. So ETA was created to look at those different fuels and how we can effectively deploy them. But really, I have three primary customers, from my perspective. One is the environment. I've been charged with saying, what is the impact of your Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions? What's the impact of your business? And how can you reduce the carbon output of what you're doing right now? Well, part of that is to provide alternative forms of energy. Two, I look at my customers. My customers are very important. It needs to be convenient. It needs to be where they need gas. It needs to be where they can charge very, very quickly, which means I need to go to at least 150 kilowatt, if not 200 kilowatt, if not 350 kilowatt, if not 500 kilowatt. And yes, we are testing a 1 megawatt charger. So that's going to really stress the grid, right? So that's number two. Number three is the community as a whole, and it's got to drive business. So it's a business decision. We're a for-profit business. So it's got to make sense for the company. When my boss says, okay, Dean, how much is that going to cost to install those chargers? Okay, what is the margin? How are we going to make that margin back? What is the CapEx expense? What is the OpEx expense? All of those business decisions become very, very important. Just generally, a 4 fast DC chargers powered by 2 350 kilowatt with 4 dispensers cost on the order of $500,000 a piece. Okay. Boss, I'm going to go install 4 fast DC chargers at $500,000. He said, okay, great. That's a CapEx expense that I'm willing to invest in, but I need to see what the margin and the profit margin coming back is. I need to know how I'm going to get that CapEx back, and I need to know how I'm going to make money off of it. It's either get the CapEx back, or you start driving people into our C-store. Oh, okay, you're going to make $10 every time they stop and charge, and you're going to make a little tiny bit of margin off the electricity, because you don't make much margin off the electricity. It's very small. So the amount you charge, or the amount we are charged per state, makes a huge difference in my business decision on where I need to go. I do think we are at a crossroads. Each component in this life cycle, I'm sorry, I used to be a professor, so I'm going to take you back to my days at school. Each one of these components, from generating power, and how you generate power is really, really important. Are you burning fossil fuels to generate power? Are you generating it with renewable energy, so you're really reducing the carbon footprint? That's critically important. The grid, is the grid stable? Can the grid provide that 6 megawatt of power that I'm going to need when I start charging 20 to 30 big Class 8 trucks? And then the charging stations and the service centers. We are service providers. We provide fuel. I heard earlier about some of the chargers being down. I mean, some of you have probably gone to charging stations and they're down. How would you like to drive and you have like 20 miles left on your range? You pull up to a service station and the charger's down. Now you got to figure out where to go. Our whole job is, as a fuel retailer, our whole job is to make sure those are working. We're going to make sure our pumps are up. We're going to make sure those chargers are working. If they're not working, we will be on it, lickety-split. That is what we do. So that's what makes fuel charging at a TA type or rest stop very, very important. I also agree with our previous speakers that our goal is to make EV charging just like it was if you were putting your gas in your car. I mean, we can't do 2 minutes, we can't do 5 minutes, but if we can go up to 150 kilowatts per kilowatt hour in your car to charge, we'll get to 18 to 20 minutes. Right now, that's about all any car can accept anyway. Some cars can accept a little bit more. But if we can get to the 18 to 20 minutes where you pull up, your car's being charged, you go into our C-store, you buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks, you go to the bathroom, you go back to your car, that is where we're trying to get at. It's all about, again, I'm thinking about the customer and the price they need to pay. We also discussed last night, do we want fuel transparency? When I have the pump and I'm actually charging, should I, as a consumer, be able to see exactly what the charges are? What charge am I getting from the utility? What charge is the tax? What charge is my margin? I would be fully in support of that as long as it's transparent. I also believe that the charging stations, especially those that are funded by NEVI or the government, need to be publicly accessible 24/7. It needs to be in well-lit areas. It needs to be in areas that are safe. And if those areas are not safe and those areas are rural, that should be part of the requirement when you go to these fast charging networks. It should be along major highways to continue the movement of goods and people. That's our goal at Travel Centers of America. As a recap from where we're going from Travel Centers of America, it's an inflection point for me because we are right now prioritizing all 275 sites. By the way, I just got an email, it's 276. So all 276 sites, and we are growing. Where are we going to put this money, this investment? Where are we going to put these sites? It depends on several factors. Well, obviously, we want to service all of our customers. We don't want to leave any rural area out. So that's one. Is it rural? Do we need to service all of our customers? Two, what is the EV adoption rate? And believe it or not, Georgia is not that far down the list. Obviously, California is way up there, but utilization rate or adoption rate is going to be up there. What is the cost to install? The cost to install in California is pretty high. The cost to install in Georgia is not that high. What is the utility rate? Can I expect what the utility rate will be? If I cannot get a good grasp on what I'm going to be charged from the utilities, and I can figure out what my margin might be to capture some of that CapEx back, it becomes a very important discussion because we have to actually amortize all the way out over 7 to 10 years what the cost of that CapEx was up front. And then lastly, we need to look at the holistic picture of where we want to be. We want to represent all the states. We don't want to just go down the West Coast all the way across the South, up the East Coast, and then across the middle, which is the highest utilization rates. We don't want to leave out the Midwest. So we take a holistic picture of all 275 sites. Every day I look at this map, and I look at those pins. When they turn green to blue to red on where we should prioritize based on some algorithms, it becomes very, very important. So I will say, from a case study perspective, Travel Centers of America, the decisions that you make with legislatively, whether it's an incentive or a mandate, the decisions that utilities make as far as what they're going to charge us, whether it's a demand charge or a rate charge, become very, very important as we look to invest our dollars and move to the future. And again, I really love Georgia. I think it's really critical. It's there's like 3 or 4 different dots on my map that are green right now for Georgia. I would love to keep it that way. So with that, I'll stop and take questions. Just not about football.
Members? Chairman?
Why do you support Clemson?
I are a Clemson graduate. ×2. I went there twice.
Mr. Bushy, hi, I'm Tricia Pridemore. I chair the Georgia Public Service Commission. You and I haven't met before, but my daddy was a truck driver, and so I've spent many times I've been to a Travel Centers of America or a Flying J. I'm just interested, not to do with my daily job, but I'm interested in your centers and what new services do you and Flying J and maybe Racetrack and Quick Trip, what do you plan to add so that I, as an EV charger, can spend 25, 30 minutes there to charge? I know I can't just walk around in circles and drink Red Bull. What else can I do?
Yeah.
What are you going to do so that I've got something to do during that 30-minute time period?
Yeah, you hit a home run as far as I think from Travel Centers of America. And I'm not going to badmouth Pilot or Love's, my 2 competitors. They're also coworkers. We at Travel Centers of America really value, from the truck driver's perspective, their mental health. So we look at their time at the stop, whether they're going to be there for 2 hours and they're going to sit down and have some dinner, or they're going to be there for 20 minutes and grab Popeyes or Starbucks. There's 2 options for you right there. Or if they're going to go and if you go into one of our travel centers, and we're actually refreshing all of our travel centers, we're spending $1 million up, and we're spending a lot of money per site to refresh all of them so they look fresh and new. We actually offer gyms, we offer ministerial services, we offer healthcare services, we have doctors on call, we have full service restaurants, we have quick service restaurants, we have break areas, we have dog walk parks because a lot of them bring their dogs with them. And some of them, we have a couple hotels also associated with our travel centers. So for us, it's all about the experience, and when you're there charging, and the truck's probably going to be more like 2-hour charging, you have something to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just as something, you'll see a thread through all of this. I mean, not right now, but I want you to get back with me about taxes charged. You know, which do you like better? You know, the retailer, you, or the, you know, provider? Because that's something we're concerned with, the state and federal sales taxes.
So it was funny, when I joined the company, they said, oh, you're joining an old truck stop. I'm like, no, I'm not joining an old truck stop. They've actually refreshed. But from our perspective, we would probably prefer it, and I would have to get back with the boss, to be just like we do with fuel. Okay. If we could make it like our diesel sales or our fuel sales and the tax on that, we handle those taxes, that would be our preference.
Okay. Any other members? Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I enjoyed going to the one on I-20 in Madison.
All right,
for
thank
sure.
you.
Next up, Allie Kelly, which we know her better by the Ray, and here she goes.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm on the agenda twice today, so I'm going to try really hard not to go on for too long or otherwise annoy you, because eventually you'll start throwing tomatoes at me or something. I am the executive director of the Ray. I've been with the organization for, I guess, 7 years now. We are a nonprofit based in Atlanta, LaGrange, and West Point, Georgia. Senator Randy Robertson does represent the area of what is now known as the Ray Highway, but what Commissioner McMurray calls I-85 in West Georgia. We've been in a partnership with Georgia DOT for 7 years, and on an 18-mile stretch of Interstate 85, we have diligently worked to establish a test bed for the nation, demonstrating advanced technologies in transportation that seek to show technologies that are ready for prime time, that are ready for a public interstate, that are driving to zero. And for those of you who don't know, the namesake of the Ray, it's Ray Anderson, who pioneered net zero and circularity concepts and practices in heavy industry. And we at the Ray with Georgia DOT and Federal Highways Administration are doing the same now in transportation. Quickly, by the numbers, we've onboarded over a dozen projects in 7 years on an 18-mile corridor. And from that corridor, we're now scaling projects to half of the country. So the Ray works in 25 states, soon to be 26 states. And I like to think that we're one of the best Georgia-grown examples in the state. No, we're not peaches or blueberries or something else that's delicious to enjoy with the family, but we do have families coming to the Ray Highway to tour what we have done and what we have built with Georgia. And we are able to scale from that test bed. I'm happy to go through all the states. I know all the projects like the back of my hand, but I want you to know that we're not about paperwork. We do have paperwork with some states. We have charters, we have LOIs, MOUs, the alphabet soup. But what's important to us is to have projects executed. That's our mission. We execute projects with Georgia DOT on an interstate that are deliberately programmed and planned to ensure the safe and efficient operation of Georgia DOT's interstate system and the state highway system. And then we endeavor to show that we can do the same across the country. And we're literally exporting technology and innovation out of West Georgia to the rest of the country and around the world. I want to recognize my friends at Kia. The first to invest in the Ray Highway from a project perspective was Kia Georgia. And I want to just recognize Georgia DOT for being an early mover in electric vehicle charging infrastructure, because the first project that Kia Georgia onboarded with the Ray was a 50 kW charging station powered by solar panels at a rest area. And I love travel centers. I love truck stops. I'm a big fan. I'm an even bigger fan of rest areas. And we had one of the only charging stations at a rest area in the country installed in August of 2015. And at the time, it was the fastest charge you could get, which is really quaint to think about that now, 50 kW being extreme fast charging. It reminds me of extreme Doritos. Like, what can be extreme about a potato chip, right? We had 50 kW. 5 years later, we upgraded it to 175 kW charging station. So we were one of the first movers, and we were enabled by an OEM who wanted to be co-branded and snuggling up against this kind of technology. And we've continued to do that kind of work with Kia in connected vehicles, in tire safety monitoring, and hope to continue to do that work in Randy Robertson's district for many years to come with Georgia DOT. I am also, in my spare time, the chair of the Aspire Center. And I really want to talk to you about the Aspire Center. I'm trying hard to discipline myself not to talk anymore about the Ray and to talk to you about the Aspire Center. So this was actually inspired by Chairman Corbett's question on the 24th when he asked Janine Miller whether or not dynamic wireless charging in a lane is NEVI compliant and whether that was in the Georgia NEVI plan. And Janine's correct. So this is not NEVI compliant today. But I do want to talk to you about the state of the technology. So I'm not advocating anything in these remarks, just helping to level set all of our understanding of where we are with wired charging today and where the technology is going in the wireless space and why. And also, Commissioner McMurray, what opportunities may exist for Georgia in the future. So the Aspire Center is a National Science Foundation Engineering Research Center, otherwise known as an NSF ERC, because everything has to be an acronym in transportation. As you can see, it's national and it's international. The Ray has been an innovation partner to Aspire since 2018, but there are also several national labs involved. So I'm probably the dumbest person in the room at the Aspire Center. NREL, Argonne National Lab, Oak Ridge National Lab, and the Idaho National Lab. Several institutions of higher learning as well. Unfortunately, my alma mater is not represented, University of Georgia, go Dogs. Okay, so these next two slides, so these are projections. These are projections put together by the national labs. Projections are not crystal ball. This is not what's going to happen. And there are a lot of assumptions baked into here, into these slides. But let's just engage in some future forward guessing. Let's engage in some assumptions. And let's engage in some of these projections that the national labs have put together. So this is a projection at 100% adoption, focusing on heavy duty, the HD segment. Now, these vehicles have not arrived yet, right? You're looking at a picture of a vehicle that has not been delivered to a customer yet. I'm really well aware of that, but let's just go with what Elon Musk is telling us. 500-mile range. So this is assuming 150 per kilowatt hour battery, which was on that curve that Michael showed us earlier, Michael Dwyer. So a 500-mile battery, a 500-mile range semi, you're looking at $150,000 for the battery. And that battery is 15,000 pounds, right? So we're talking about added weight onto heavy-duty vehicles. And that's another issue for another day. But we're going to have to look at truck weights, or we're going to have to look at payload, and maybe there's a balance, right, of how many batteries do you want to carry versus how many pallets of diapers do you want to carry to the distribution center, and how much can our roads handle in that added weight of the battery plus the payload. Also, this is assuming a 2 megawatt piece of charging equipment and a 30-minute charging session. So there's a lot of assumptions built into this side. On the other side of the graph is what Idaho National Lab put together, showing solar panels generating DC or distributed current energy with backup battery storage, that DC energy going straight to high-powered charging, but also being grid connected with the DC AC converter so that the grid can provide backup for that heavy-duty charging scenario. And that is shown in a hub. All of this so far is wired. Again, these are all projections and assumptions, but I know y'all are going to ask about the cost. There's going to be a question about what's the cost of installing charging equipment in the roadbed. What's going to be the cost of that infrastructure, and how does it stack up to other charging technologies and their costs? So you can see, we actually have let me see if I can get rid of the warning on the screen. See, I'm in technology, so I know how to do this. Okay. So you can see that based on these projections, electric roads stack up pretty well to other methods of charging, including long-range batteries on heavy-duty trucks with ultra-fast, i.e. 2 megawatt charging in 30-minute sessions. We can come back to this slide and y'all can pummel me over the cost question. Okay, so let's just talk about the technology for a minute to make sure we're all on the same page. So we've got inductive loops sunk into the roadbed. They're receiving energy from the roadsides. So there are power electronics in the roadbed. There are power systems in the right-of-way. The inductive loops in the lane create a magnetic field. DC cannot be shared over a magnetic field, but alternating current can. You can share, you can distribute, you can dispense AC energy over the air using a magnetic field. The magnetic field is not activated all the time. We're not going to fry someone's dog. We're not going to set off anybody's pacemaker. This is a just-in-time delivery that is a part of a smart roadway system, and it is accommodating vehicles that have receivers on the undercarriage of the vehicles. So the receiver accepts the AC energy over the magnetic field that is created from the roadbed. The loops are sunk 2 inches, give or take, into the roadbed. Okay, so let's talk about power. So we know that we can do this with 50 to 100 kW. Everyone's got a test track. There's a test track in Utah where the Aspire Center is located. 50 kW to 100 kW is proven out on that test track at interstate speeds with efficiencies demonstrated at 87 to 94%, which is on the par with wired charging. I'm not saying we should do it everywhere. I'm not saying we should do it all the time, but I'm saying that the efficiencies and the rate of power transfer today is on the par with wired charging. Any questions so far? I got techie there for a minute. You just want me to go? Keep rolling. Okay, I'm rolling. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the existing pilots that have been around the block a few times. First of all, in LA, 500 kW at the port for drayage. Why would you do 500 kW at the port? Because at the Port of LA, the workers are all in unions. And unionized labor is not super excited about handling giant cables with 500 kW or a megawatt of charging capacity. And so this has worked really well on the West Coast, where you have a lot of union workers at the ports. So the trucks, as they're waiting in line, queuing, receive wirelessly from the roadbed at a crawl 500 kW, and they're running drayage from the port. Okay, similarly, on the right-hand side of the screen, you actually have a regional route between the Port of Seattle and the Port of Portland. That's a megawatt charging station, a megawatt wireless, over the air. This is with the United Parcel Service, and as you can see, the truck provider is Kenworth. Okay, these are all legit companies, right? This is Cummins, this is Schneider, this is Kenworth, this is UPS. And we're showing this in the freight environment because, again, the question is how many batteries and at what cost to payload does battery electric freight operate, and how can a mix of charging technologies mitigate the challenge for freight? Okay, so what's coming? So I've just showed you a couple of port examples. This is what I really want to run through today. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to try to go fast. So the first coming pilot, this is new infrastructure, and you've probably seen all of these in the news. This is Indiana DOT working with the Aspire Center through Purdue University, and also a company called Magment. Magment only works with concrete, so this is only concrete roads. You can have asphalt applications, and I'll get into that. So this is going to be a 1/4 mile of interstate. It's going to be specifically for heavy duty, and we know that because The charging capacity of the roadway will be 200 kW. That's a lot. 200 kW, that's twice of what we've proven so far in Utah. They do have an OEM truck partner, but they haven't announced it yet. And with Magment, they're going to do concrete, but they also hope to expand this to be asphalt as well. Relatively small, right? It's a quarter mile. Okay, Michigan tried to get a jump on Indiana. This is a collaboration between the state government, the city of Detroit, their Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, and a ton of OEM partners. So, oh, and I forgot to mention with the Indiana pilot, their construction goal is 2023. That's next year. In Michigan, they are working with a company called Electrification, which is also an Aspire partner. They have an OEM partner already announced, and that's Ford and their E-Transit medium-duty van. This is going to be a mile of urban roadway, so different from Indiana. Indiana was a quarter mile interstate, 200 kW, heavy-duty focused. This is different. This is the city of Detroit. This is an entire mile of urban roadway. It is meant to service all class of vehicles, passenger, medium, and heavy duty. And you can tell that because the main partner is Ford with their E-Transit. The rate of charge from the road is going to be 25 kW to 50 kW. And again, they're going to be going to construction in 2023. So we're going to see Indiana and Michigan moving in the next 6 to 12 months with these pilots. Okay, the next one. This is in Florida. Central Florida Expressway. This is going to be south of the Disney complex. This is new roadway, 5 miles of new roadway, a state route 516. There's going to be approximately 3/4 of a mile incorporated into that new project. It's already been funded, so this has, like the other two pilots, funding in hand. The construction for this also will begin in 2023. And this pilot is going to be about $500 million set aside out of a total budget for the 5-mile roadway of $10 million. Let me reverse that. 10 million out of a total budget of 500 million. The math didn't work. The planning should be finishing up at the end of this quarter. Construction is set to begin in Q4 of 2023, and the route will be activated by 2025. I don't know how else to say. Regional diversity, the pilot's happening in the next 6 to 12 months. I know it seems Jetsons when we ask questions about, charging while you drive. But I mean, this is not what's happening in Epcot. This is what's happening in the United States. I'm going to keep going, but I don't have much more, Mr. Chairman.
2 more minutes.
Okay. Utah. So the state legislature in Utah funded the Aspire Center to do both an electric train project and an electric roadway project. You're going to see a bunch of different stops. There's going to be power supplied to the electric train. The electric train stations are going to be multimodal hubs. They're going to be servicing the general public with fast charging. They're going to be servicing EV transit. And that same power system is going to be powering the roadbed as well. That's on Interstate 15. And I should just take a quick second to tell you that the Federal Highway Administration in April of 2021 released a memo with guidance saying the words dynamic wireless charging in a lane is part of a suite of infrastructure called clean energy and connectivity projects that are not only allowed in the rights of way of the interstate system, but Federal Highways has said from a federal perspective that wireless dynamic charging lanes are as important as the transportation use for the right-of-way. So as we think about planning for the right-of-way for adding lanes or adding capacity, the federal government believes that incorporating infrastructure like this in our state highway system across the country and in the interstate system is a priority. So it's not a question of, is it allowed? And it's not a question of if it's going to happen. This is really about when. And the when that we hear at Aspire over and over again from state to state is starting in 2023. Okay, so this basically just lays out everything that I've said. Pilots in 2023, longer pilots in 26, highways and interstates by 2035, hundreds of miles. That's the arc of the ubiquitousness of this infrastructure. And I just want to end by saying a couple of things. Additional pilots, the Florida Turnpike has engaged AECOM. They plan to release their intention to negotiate, which is kind of like our RFP process, but their intention to negotiate, which will be released in 2022. They're going to award that project in 2023, and that's going to be for a mile with the Florida Turnpike on their SunTrack system. They're slating 2024 for construction. And then last but not least is Ohio and Pennsylvania. That will be the first interstate wireless dynamic charging lane route. The Ohio Turnpike and the Pennsylvania Turnpike, both partners of the Ray and of Aspire, are going to create a long-range interstate wireless dynamic charging route on their turnpike system as shared infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Allie. What a great presentation. There's going to be a lot of questions about this, but we're not going to be able to entertain them this morning. But we'll probably try to get you back at another meeting. But well, great, great. All right, so we're going to move quickly into the next presenters, and we're not going to get all of these presenters done before lunch, I'm afraid, because with due respect to their time as well. So we're going to start with Georgia Power. Stephanie Grossman and Jeff Grubb, if you would please come to the front. And then we'll have the EMCs following them and Daryl Ingram with Electric City. So we'll try to get Georgia Power done before lunch. It's 11:23 now. We need to break at 11:45 to let people go to their rooms, get their bags, and then we'll come back after lunch at approximately 12:45, and we'll pick up with the EMCs at 12:45. Is that fair? So Georgia Power, you have until 11:45. That's 20 minutes. Is that enough time, Jeff? All right. Is this peak? Are these peak hours or off peak? It's just a little too early for that, right? Too soon. We have.
All right. Well, good morning. We do have some slides. I believe you all have a printout in your packets from us, but the slides will get going on the screen in just a few minutes. So good morning. First, I'd just like to thank the members of the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. And as noted in the last committee meeting, we agree that it's important that we get this topic right on behalf of all Georgians, and I appreciate the leadership of the Joint Chairman and each of the committee members to fully consider the needs of this industry. My name is Stephanie Gossman, and I am the Electric Transportation Manager for Georgia Power Company. In this role, I lead a team that's responsible for the development, implementation, and administration of Georgia Power's electric transportation offerings for our customers. And it's an honor to speak with you today about how Georgia Power is supporting our state's growing electric transportation ecosystem. So at Georgia Power, we are proud to serve Georgia's communities and are committed to ensuring that all of our customers have clean, safe, reliable, and affordable electric service to meet their energy needs. We continue to make critical investments in our generation fleet, as well as our transmission and distribution systems, so that we can support the energy needs for all of our customers, including Georgia's growing electric transportation sector. The investments that we are making today will ensure, this doesn't work, will ensure that we can continue providing our customers with the reliable and affordable electric service that they deserve and expect, both for today and for decades to come. This includes the infrastructure needed to support Georgia's growing electric transportation sector and the evolving needs of our customers, such as charging service providers, large retailers, and convenience stores with electric transportation needs. Thank you. Oh, we'll keep it there. Thank you. The infrastructure investments Georgia Power is making to support the electric transportation sector, including the needs of companies like charging service providers, are our primary focus in helping to develop Georgia's evolving electric transportation industry. Indeed, private charging service companies presently own 97% of the public charging infrastructure in Georgia today. In addition to supporting Georgia's electric transportation needs through critical infrastructure, Georgia Power acts as a charging service provider of last resort by installing a limited number of publicly available DC fast charging sites throughout the state, primarily in areas that are unlikely to see private investment for many years. We provide this service on a limited basis through a program called Community Charging, which was approved by the Georgia Public Service Commission in the company's 2019 rate case filing. Because one of the greatest challenges for EV drivers is access to charging service, we offer rebates, rate options, and infrastructure programs to all kinds of residential and business customers. Although most EV drivers do the majority of their charging at home, as opposed to in the public, the need for publicly available charging infrastructure remains high because EV drivers still rely on the availability of public charging infrastructure to support their transportation needs. In the company's 2022 rate case filing, which we filed in June before the Georgia Public Service Commission, we requested a level of funding for our community charging program similar to that received in the 2019 rate case for community charging. Our request increased only to keep up with the cost of providing an equivalent level of service, considering the impacts of inflation and increasing technology capabilities. This request is consistent with the commitment we expressed during the 2022 legislative session that we do not intend to deploy vast numbers of utility-owned public DC fast chargers through the community charging program. In the 2022 rate case filing, we also requested funding to continue offering infrastructure up to the charger through our Make Ready program. Now, since the 2022 legislative session, we have worked with and continue to work with multiple stakeholders to address two main areas of concern identified by our customers who provide or who want to provide EV charging services to EV drivers. The first topic was the ability to bill EV drivers by kilowatt hour instead of by unit of time in Georgia. Although we believe that nothing in the Territorial Act prohibits charging companies from billing by the kilowatt hour for charging services, we recognize this area needs additional clarity, and that's why all stakeholders have already agreed on language that makes clear that charging companies can bill EV drivers by the kilowatt hour without violating the law. The second topic focused on demand charges for EV charging service providers. Consistent with our testimony during session, Georgia Power has listened to and heard these concerns. In response, we have filed a rate rider in the 2022 rate case to specifically address this concern and mitigate demand charges for our customers while this market is in its infancy. We will continue to work with the Georgia Public Service Commission, our customers, and all other stakeholders through this ongoing regulatory proceeding. The EV, and more broadly, the electric transportation industry, is in a time of remarkable transformation and growth, and Georgia is at the forefront of this transformation as we lead the nation in developing a robust and comprehensive EV ecosystem. As Commissioner Wilson mentioned in his testimony, in just the last 2 years, Georgia's electric transportation industry has brought more than 18,000 jobs and $13 billion worth of investment to our state, and this is just the beginning. In summary, at Georgia Power, we consider it a privilege to serve our customers and Georgia's communities. We are committed to making the infrastructure investments needed to support Georgia's energy needs and its expanding and thriving electric transportation sector as we partner with our customers to help reduce barriers and drive Georgia forward into our future. And at this time, I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Jeff Grubb, Georgia Power's Director of Resource and Policy Planning, who will talk about our grid planning process and how we are prepared to meet our customers' needs both today and in the future.
Thank you, Stephanie. As Ms. Gossman just spoke to our plans to add infrastructure charging, I'm here to speak to the upstream part of being able to provide energy to those chargers for our customers' use. And so that includes generation resources, but also the transmission and distribution wires to get that energy to those chargers to meet our customers' needs. And so as Stephanie said, I'm the Director of Resource Policy and Planning, and in that role, I'm responsible for the long-term generation planning for the company and the integrated resource plan that we filed at the commission. And in that role, as we look at serving our customers' needs from a generation standpoint, we also work very closely with our transmission and distribution planning parts of the business in an integrated fashion to make sure that we can get all those megawatt hours to our end-use customers. And so my role here today is to speak to the market structure and planning processes that we have in place that well position all of the utilities here to be able to accommodate the growth of electric transportation in the state of Georgia. So several aspects of the way we are structured help us feel very confident in our ability to serve growth of electric transportation regardless of the amount of growth that we look to. I'm going to speak specifically more towards Georgia Power's processes, but all of the companies here do very similar processes, and one of the other things that we do is we are very well coordinated in a lot of those aspects. Firstly, on the integrated transmission system or the bulk power system in the state, we are co-owners and we plan that system together. So we have joint working groups. We have all of our coordination there on how to make sure that the electricity can get there through the bulk transmission system. On the generation side, we all plan for our own resources to meet our customers' needs, but we are absolutely coordinated in the day-to-day operations. So the Southern Company control area and the EMCs and MEAG, all of our control areas are coordinated in real-time operations. And so we're working together in those ways to make sure that the state, not just each of the companies, is available and ready to accommodate the growth in electric transportation. So I wanted to just hit a few parts of the planning process, high level, to give you all the confidence that we have that we're well suited to serve electric transportation now and into the future. And the key part of that is our load forecasting. So when you think about generation being able to serve the load, the wires being able to serve the load, it all starts with, well, what's the load going to be? We have a very robust load forecasting process. We have an entire group that's dedicated to it, looking at economic trends, looking at what we see on the system. And part of that is what is the forecast for electric transportation. And so we absolutely have in our forecast projections of existing electric transportation, both residential, people charging at home, and commercial. So we've got forecasts for both of those that we're incorporating into our plans. We use an EPRI, which is Electric Power Research Institute, medium case of electric transportation growth. And so that's around, for Georgia Power, around 250-something thousand EVs by 2030, roughly double that for the state, and then about 600,000 or so electric vehicles by 2040. And so when you look at that type of load growth, it's about, I think, 70,000 cars a year or so growth. But for our system, it's only around 1% of our total peak demand, growing up to around 3% by 2040. And so a lot of the load is not just the amount, it's when it's there. So you've heard us talk about peak load. We build the generation to serve the peaks. We build the transmission to serve the peaks. And so the contribution from electric transportation is not a one-for-one on that, which is beneficial. That means you can accommodate that growth with less infrastructure, but you are able to plan for that infrastructure. And so when you look at having that electrical load forecast, like I said, not the megawatt hours or the kilowatt hours that you're serving, but also what it does in those peaks, that then feeds into how we plan the rest of the system. So it's very key. We have a lot of internal review of that. Every load forecast that we take to the commission, whether it's in a rate case or an IRP, undergoes a lot of scrutiny. So a lot of eyes on that forecast, which again, a part of that is the assumptions on electric transportation. Once you get past that, and I want to speak to, so you've got the chargers that are serving the customer's needs to charge vehicles. Now, what about the wires that are getting there? So distribution is that first level of wires that are coming to serve those meters that have those chargers there. This is a very dynamic process on the distribution side. We study it constantly, and our distribution planning group is studying hundreds of circuits every year based on, once we project those lines being around 75% full, we start studying those to look at, all right, how do we need to reposition them? Do we need to invest in them? So as houses start adding cars, we'll start seeing that growth. We'll be able to project that growth and look ahead at our distribution circuits. And then importantly, kind of the last mile, a fleet conversion or something that would bring on more load more quickly. We're in discussions with those customers in almost all cases, whether it's through Stephanie's team or some of our other customer account managers, if somebody's looking at, hey, I want to go electrify my fleet, we work very closely with them so we know that that's coming. So from a distribution standpoint, you're able to adjust those more quickly. It's a little shorter time frame to be able to reconduct their distribution line or things like that. But that dynamic process allows us to stay on top of that. The next step in the system is up one more level to the bulk transmission system. These are the networks of high voltage lines throughout the state that we all own together. We plan at least every year to update that. We're looking at 10 years, sometimes more than 10 years, where we're looking at as generation resources change on the system, whether you're retiring a unit, whether you're adding a lot of renewables, and how your load is growing. We use that forecast to look at substation levels, look at that bulk system to make sure that we can accommodate it. And that whole process is driven by reliability. They're studying how do we make sure that we serve all the load if we lose a generation unit and we lose a transmission component. It's a NERC, which is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Reliability standards, you've got to be able to serve load in those conditions. So they run hundreds and hundreds of cases looking at the system to make sure we can accommodate that load. So with that size of a system, our load at Georgia is somewhere around 16,000 or so on a kind of a normal basis, 16,000 megawatts. When you talk about 1 or 3% of that coming from electric transportation, we don't see that alone driving transmission projects, but it's very much part of what we're planning for. Now you've got to have the megawatt hours to get there, right? So we talked about the wires. From a generation standpoint, we look at, all right, so what is our forecasted load from all of our customer base? What's the electric transportation contribution to that and the peak? Now what we do is look at how much generation do we need to serve it. And I'll talk a little bit more on the next page about specifically how we do that. But we basically have an amount of megawatts above our forecasted load to handle non-typical weather, unit performance outages. And when we look 7, 8, 9 years out and say, all right, if I need this much generation, do I have it on the fleet right now? And if I don't, we've got an entire process through the commission where we go and deploy or procure that generation. And so we're looking at all of these 10, the distribution's looking right now in the few years out, 2 to 3 years out, transmission generation's looking up to 10 to 20 years out to make sure that we're keeping ahead of those load growths so that we can deploy resources as we need. And the next piece with that is market structure and governance. And so you hear a lot of discussions around different parts of the country. In Georgia, which has been set up by the legislator years ago, and for us at Georgia Power, it's the commission with the EMCs, it's through their members. We are the parties responsible for reliably serving our customers and doing it in an affordable manner. If there is an issue with reliability on the system, you don't have to look any further than us in terms of what went wrong, what do we need to do. So we all are able to focus not only on affordability, but reliability, because we, at the end of the day, are the single parties that are responsible for serving our customers. With that, we're in the part of the southeastern pool. We're interconnected to our neighbors. We're able to work together there. We coordinate within the state. And so the market structure very much allows us to incorporate these load forecasts, project those out, have the governance we have, and build infrastructure to meet those future needs. I don't know all the other markets, but not all markets are set up that way in terms of who's looking at generation reliability, who's looking at transmission reliability. It very rarely is the same party. So when things happen, like a few years ago in ERCOT, you got people pointing fingers at everybody else. If Georgia Power doesn't serve their customers, Commissioner Pridemore and her colleagues know exactly where to come, and that's us. And so that allows us to really be focused. So want to hit real quickly just to if we can get next slide, sorry, on the generation reliability part. So again, I mentioned that we look at how much generation do we need. If you look over on the left, we basically look at our summer loads and our winter loads, and those include our projections of electrical transportation and how it's going to contribute to those demands. We then have a reserve margin that's higher than that. So if we have 10,000 megawatts of load, we're going to carry more than 10,000 megawatts of generation. Our loads are around 16 or 17. But what this also points to is how our planning process allows us to change with changes in loads and the way customers behave. over the past 6 to 7 years, we've seen a huge growth in winter electrical load in terms of heat pump sales and other electric heating. We were able to stay in front of that, and we study our reliability cases at least every 3 years. And as we saw that winter growth, which in a lot of cases was more megawatts than we're projecting for electric transportation, we identified winter as being something we needed to focus at, went to the commission, sought of authorization to study both seasons and be able to add to that. So what you see on that reserve margin is we carry around 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts, depending on the season, above what we normally need to serve our customers. And as we project out load, we project that generation. When we're short of that amount, we then go to the commission and say we need to add capacity and we need to do it through this manner. So we're staying ahead of load growth, including electric transportation from that standpoint. And the way we determine that reserve margin, and this could be a whole other 30 minutes, but I won't do it. We basically study 700,000 plus situations on the system in terms of weather years. We go back and study what very cold 1982 weather would look like with today's loads. We look at 100 weather years. We look at different generation performances. So reliability is easy on a day where the weather's mild and the units are all there and we got the load forecast exactly right. But you have a very, very cold snap like ERCOT had a few years ago. You have issues with your generators. That case is a lot harder to serve. We study 700,000 plus cases looking at serving that load and also what it cost us to serve that load. And we file that study with the commission every 3 years, looking at both reliability and affordability to come up with what that margin is. So went through a lot of detail there. I think the key thing is we're on top of the electric transportation in terms of it's a driver in the business, it's a driver on the loads. Very robust process to capture that, and then that feeds to all of our long-term planning that we're looking at. And so between the market structure we have and the processes we have in place, we feel very confident that we're serving electric transportation needs now, and we'll be able to in the future across a wide range of expected penetration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a couple minutes left before we break for lunch. We may have to come back after lunch and take some more questions. I think there may be several. But real quickly, in elevator speech, why are we different than California? Last week we saw the brownouts and the pause. They tapped the brakes and don't charge your cars because of their lack of energy or whatever. Why are we so much different? Is it because of the great leadership we have at Georgia Power and the Public Service Commission, or is
that's it? Absolutely.
Is it because we have a new power plant coming on board next year with nuclear energy?
No, it's a combination of things, and I'm not an expert exactly on California. However, it is a regional transmission organization, or an RTO, where you have the system operator that's looking at the transmission system, but all the different companies are proposing in generation resources. And so I'm not familiar with how they study long term. I don't think they do the way we do. So we go to the commission with a focus on, do we need 10% reserves all the way up to 30? How much do we need to do it? What does it cost? And so we're very much focused long term to make sure that we can make investments to be there years down the road. California's market for generators, you usually get paid. I think from California's market, lots of markets, you only get paid for your generator if you actually generate. And so there's less incentive to do things that we do from a reliability standpoint. So we are always, for a gas unit, we will go get firm gas transportation on the interstate pipeline, so we know when we need that gas unit, we can operate it, because the commission allows us to recover that cost, because the commission understands we need that combined cycle unit when we need it. And so we do a lot of things on the reliability side that I'm not sure there's the same signal in California. Also, when we look at solar, adding solar, we do reliability studies that we file at the commission that says here's what's going to happen on the system as we continue to add this solar, and what are the integration costs. And we get approval from the commission on what that cost is, so that when we add solar and we look at the economics of solar, we understand that we're also going to have to add resources that respond to the fact that it's intermittent. And then if it's economic, we'll add them. So I don't know that California does all of that. I'm not saying they do, but you don't have those companies like us that are looking from generation, transmission, distribution, all the way down. And we're able also to work with transmission and make decisions, say, hey, it's better to build wires than to build a unit, or it might be better to build a unit and avoid building wires. We can make those decisions because we look at all of it, whereas it's different in those markets.
Thank you. I want to thank Stephanie and Jeff for their testimony. And I want to especially thank Stephanie for making a point that during this past legislative session, it was quite an ordeal, but one of the checklist, one of the issues on the checklist is going to be for the resale, as y'all have already heard from some of the testimony this morning. And through them and the EMCs and MEAG and them, that was one of the issues that we had already worked out, hopefully not to be revisited since it was such an ordeal. But one of the questions I do have to ask is, you brought up the 2019 rate case. One of the issues that was brought up during our discussions and in Chairman Parsons' committee, and that was, could you tell me a little bit, if you even can find out if you have any knowledge, but in the 2019 rate case that allowed y'all to put things under the rate base, how much of that, not make ready, but how much of that would be the chargers? Because there's several of us that tend to believe that, you know, I understand the power company's business, but, you know, a lot of us don't feel like we need to be subsidizing with our business and homeowner rates somebody's EV chargers, that they need to be doing that themselves. So if you back up, and you made a reference to the 2019 case, and of course there's a 2022 rate case that's underway now. We understand that part of that rate base should deal with doing make ready, doing infrastructure. But when you get into that part of the actual chargers, can you give me an idea? Do y'all have any idea how much since 2019 has been spent to that actually goes on our actual homeowner and business utility bills?
So what goes on to the bills, not what was approved?
How much has been under the 2019 rate base that they allowed y'all to put some of this other than make ready? Unless y'all consider chargers make ready, and I don't. But
No, they are two separate things and
Right.
two separate programs. So from the 2019 rate case order, we were approved to spend $6 million over 3 years in this program we call community charging that includes the chargers. As far as what amount is on customers' bills, I'll follow up with you separately. I don't have it right now, so I'll have to follow up. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And again, thanks for making a point to the committee about all of the hard work that y'all put into getting part of this checklist done. Thank y'all.
I hate to do this, but I think we're going to have to break. People have to check out of the room, so go ahead and get your bags, check out. Lunch is on your own. The buffet's open in the cafeteria or the restaurant, and then we're going to start 12:45 at the latest. We may start earlier. If everybody will get back in their room in here by 12:35, we'll go ahead and start. We're going to get Georgia Power back up for a few more questions, and then the EMCs and the MEAGs. Be back here around 12:30, 12:35.